shouldn't matter what kind of shoes you have. It shouldn't matter what kind of. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The best thing was though, it's like when you got the new shoes as a kid, and you're just like walking into your class, like you're like 8 years old and that, you walk and you're like, ugh, check them out, and all of them like, whoa.
And looking back at it, they probably
Just
weren't
got
the
them
best
last
shoes
week.
as well.
And there was always, I kid you not, every classroom, there was always that one girl that had the light shoes, you know, the ones that like every time you step, light and that, light up. All the time. There was always one. And
Yeah, and they're cool shoes.
I know, but like,
What about the ones with wheels on them?
I loved them.
I remember when,
Skating ones.
I think one of my friends had it once, but just all recess and lunch, they would just like pull in onto the court like surf. Like, what are you doing?
What about
Just
light up
roll.
shoes? I loved light up shoes so much. I like pink ones.
I
with
think they're really
flowers.
cute.
Like,
They don't make them for adults, unfortunately.
Oh.
But I remember when I went from public to private, like going from like a school uniform but very casual to like a very like a button up tie, certain coloured socks and all that. Especially some uniform was fine, you know, just white shirt, shorts, and then just your black shoes. But in the winter, like, you know, white shirt, the grey pants, grey socks, black shoes, the blazer, and all that. And I remember, because I only, it was like year 10 that I went into the private school, and when they told me this whole uniform thing, I was fine with it. I don't mind wearing uniform. But I remember my first week there, I got not told off because I knew it was my first week there. I've never been in a private school before. The shoes I was wearing weren't correct. So I ended up wearing, because you weren't supposed to wear like bands and that, I ended up wearing black bands. But what me and mum did was got a black texture and scribbled up the Vans logo.
Oh my god.
So I couldn't see it.
Yeah.
So while everyone was wearing like these like, you know, uncomfortable shoes, I'm over here chilling, some Vans on. And everyone knew they were Vans, but none of the teachers did. And then that's another thing. Especially with good ties, they were very on that. Especially for boys, shaving, no facial hair whatsoever. So I remember when, because in Roxby, year 12s would walk around with full on beards and that. I go over there, everyone's would look clean, nice. And then obviously, you know, being in year 10 and that, I hadn't done any shaving whatsoever. And then when I had my little orientation thing, I was with a few other students. They told the rest to leave, but then the principal was like, George, can I just talk you through a second? So I had to talk to the principal. He was like, yeah, we have like a, you know, a rule of like shaving, so like, you know, all these has to go.
Yeah.
I was like, alright. So then like, you know, I had to be basically forced to shave and that, but like, some of my friends that I made there, they have to like shave every week or every few days because it just comes back that quickly and they just get so annoying. And then if you ever rocked up to school and they didn't like what was on your face, they would send you to the front office and then you have to shave yourself there. But like, I don't think like, they won't even give you like the proper stuff. They'll just give you like, you know, a very like cheap razor blade.
That's
like,
so weird.
yeah, like, and then you like, you know, you're out of classroom for a bit and then you walk in and then it's just like all this like clean, but you know, made a few cuts.
Yeah, I know the eastern suburbs in Sydney are like, the schools there are so bad. Like they're all private and they're all like pretty snobby. And they have like this culture of just like guys like, just like the guy culture is so gross, and like the uniforms are just as bad. Cause like they gotta wear those hats, like they kind of look like straw hats, but they're like really flat. They have to have the socks up in a certain like length. And like they have to wear ties, blazers, like everything, and just like I'm not a fan of that stuff. Like I'd rather be comfortable and look like crap rather than looking good and being uncomfortable. Because like you're gonna be at school all day. Like I don't want to like fiddle around. Like
especially like we like apparently we were supposed to have like our tops tucked in. But what everyone did, every guy did, was we would always wear like our spray jackets, zip them up, have our tops out.
yeah,
Because they couldn't see it, and I think the teachers knew what we were doing, but then, you know, if I can't see it, it's not there. Like
Yeah.
it's not hurting if I can't see it. And they were alright though, they were chill. But like if you're walking around and like it was like unzipped and like you got the top out, they're like, hey, tuck it in or zip it up. So a lot of teachers will play chill with that.
Yeah.
And none of them really mind.
I hate the so in my high school, for senior year, so year 11 and 12, they like you had to wear white and navy blue rather than the because our school uniform was maroon and blue, and then I hated the white tops because they were see through and everything, and I'm just like, why did it have to be white? Like, why can't we wear something else?
A lot of schools have white tops.
I just don't like the white tops because like they can get dirty like pretty easily.
I've had a very bad experience with was it a white top? I think no, because in Roxby, yeah, because when I was young at Roxby, the uniform was kind of, it was like just wear a navy blue shirt and navy blue shorts and then whatever shoes, and then as I got into year 6, we had a full school uniform change to something more proper. So we actually had button-up shirts and all that stuff. But then I think it was like the first year that we had this whole new uniform, and I was in art class. I decided, I'm going to throw this paint by the lid back to my table.
Yeah.
As soon as I got to the table, splattered all over me, all over this new uniform, all over the pants. It was. And the table looked a mess, and then everyone was just looking at me. I was like, yeah.
I love that like internal war of like primary versus it was public versus private. Like
It's
every
so
time you
funny.
go on like school excursion, like given the evil eye.
I remember at Roxby we would always talk shit about private schools.
Yeah, they're awful.
And then like, well, look, I'll tell you what, our school, we're a reception to year 12, and it's the only one big school there. And it's not a pretty school to say that, but it is, when I left it wasn't like amazing, but what they're doing now with it, they're doing a lot of stuff. Like I think in certain sections they're making like little garden areas, and then they're adding like, they've moved a lot of stuff around. When I went down there the other month, I had a little walk around the school. I was like, why wasn't it like this when I was there?
Yeah.
But it's mainly just blocked out sections. It's all concrete, brick, dirt.
Yeah, I was
and all
actually
that.
pretty lucky with our high school. We had like a lot of like
Not much
natural land
indoors.
and stuff. So it was good. Yeah. I was actually so close to going to like a sports high school because I used to do sports back then. And I'm glad I didn't because like I had so many stories of like sport high schools, and it's just awful there apparently. And I just couldn't like bear the uniforms as well, and like the traveling distance, and like I'm kind of glad I went to this high school. I think that.
The best thing was being in a town like that.
Yeah.
You could, like, if I had school at 8:30, I could legit leave home like 5 minutes before class started, and I'll be there.
Yeah, same
Walking
mine.
distance.
Yeah, mine was like 10 minutes. Like, my house was there, then I had like the local pools, and then I had the high school, so I just had to go around. It's like a 10-minute walk, which is so good.
It was the
And
best
in
thing.
my so we had like 3 periods, and I like sneak and go back home for lunch and just chill and stuff. Then I come back, and it was so
The
good.
thing I hated the most was, I remember, because at our school, like year 11s and 12s, when it was lunchtime, because you have a decent, you have like 40 minutes or something like that. Only the year 11s and 12s were allowed to go to like our little shopping centre, because like we had like
We weren't allowed to. We couldn't leave the school grounds at all, but I did it anyway.
the school grounds to the centre was like legit, it's right in front of it.
Yeah.
So and then there was always 2 teachers that would go out there and just supervise. And then they'll all sit there. There's like we had like the black stump, and that was like a little bit of a lunch and a run. And blah blah. And I was like, oh my god, yes! I can't wait till I was 11 and 12. And then I remember when like year 6 or 7, they added in the rule that year 11s and 12s were no longer allowed to go anymore, and I was so annoyed.
Yeah.
And then they were online too, because it was like the one like privileged thing as being like the older kids there who had to like go out.
I think we used to we were allowed to go out, but I think something happened and like they stopped, like seniors are
It's always it's like, oh, one student does it.
Yeah.
No one else will do it.
Yeah.
That was like the same thing. What was it? One student. Like I remember when I did my school research, because there's different sections for where schools can go. It was like my school, we had like the beach month kind of thing. But apparently from one school that we knew, because one kid did one bad thing, the entire school wasn't allowed in the good spot because of one kid did. And yeah, I understand the rule, like if one can do it, let's say the others can't. But like that's like a minority of kids that would do that.
The lights in the figure drawing room,
The majority of
they only have those ones that go like that.
I remember.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the only lighting for that room.
At the moment, yeah, they're trying to fix it all, but they
Put
can't
it
get
on someone else's
the
car and just
Okay.
have paper on it. So like because it was in the sun, it looked fun when you try to scrub it into.
Okay.
And ever
Why is
since
it? Is
then,
it
like,
alright?
Yeah, I think it's okay. I was just like, I don't know how to turn on the other lights,
Yeah,
but
no,
that's
it's
fine.
not. It's probably going to shine in some people's faces, but it's still like,
I can help
hopefully
but
it
laugh
won't be
because
for
like the
a
guys,
week or
like
two.
the owner of the car was
Okay.
asshole.
Was that random or was it like friends that did it?
Oh, it was like I think just classmates sort of thing.
So I remember I got a random Snapchat one day. One of my friend's cars, his friends, they bubble wrapped around the entire car a bunch of times, and then they put a bunch of sticky notes all over the windows. And the image looked so funny. Like I don't think I could even open the door because that much bubble wrap wrapped around it. And I remember one time, like, this girl was like St. Michael's and Henry Beach, a bit of rivalry between us. And during like the year 12s, like near the end of the school year, they're like fun and all that. So what a bunch of year 12 Henry kids did was they egged a bunch of year 12's cars. So they drove past our school and egged a bunch of cars. But I think they actually accidentally hit a teacher's car. And they spray painted on one of the students' cars a very nasty image. If you know what the image is.
I remember when a kid smashed into the teacher's car once, and he was like beyond and he just came to class just red faces. And then like we all knew what happened because we saw out the window just this dent in his car.
Something like that happens, you're not gonna hide it. The whole school's gonna know like that.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
Words bed like fire. But then I remember what our year 12s did, right? In the middle of the night, gone to high school in one of their sports sheds. I think they did, I forgot what they did. They spelled something out on the top of their shed. Like, I forgot what they did it with. But then, yeah, it was like a little message thing on there. And it was like their little payback. And I don't think Henry did anything else. It was kind of like, I want to trade. But I thought we all four probably were just going to kick up a notch. And we wanted to kick up a notch, so it's fun. Because, we're the young ones that are like, come on, but yeah, just nothing more than that happened, but it was fun to see.
Because that you learn more about proportionality.
High school was such a weird I know, it's just changed. Cause like,
all I remember is just being, seeing my friend group, we had to like torment each other. And I remember, because we had in our lockers, right, what we did is you're given a locker number and you padlock, blah, blah, blah. And in year 11, I think year 11, we decided, because everyone had their lockers on top of each other. You know, if you wanted to get your lockers,
we had lockers on our last year of high school, but you had to pay for
the
it.
whole school has lockers, like
Wow.
from year 8 to 12. Like you have to run locker.
We never did. We had to carry our bag like the whole time.
I remember,
So annoying.
yeah, that was the same in Russia, but like, yeah, I think it was in year 11. The four of us didn't want to have to deal with like this new year, like it was like top, middle, and bottom. So if you're on the bottom, you were done for. You're just gonna get a bunch of knees to the face. And I had experience bottom locker a bit. So what we decided, we went to a teacher said, there's a bunch of, the year 12's already gone, and there's like this whole year 12 section, a bunch of lockers there, and no one's using it. We said, yeah, can we just move our stuff to those lockers so we don't have to do that? And they actually agreed. So the four of us moved our stuff. We had our own lockers. We all gave each other tops. And the locker I chose, I didn't know at the point. It was just, I thought it was a normal locker, but then I found that it was like a single one on its own. And I remember, they found out about it, my friends, and then I remember one day I went there, and my whole locker was pulled out from the wall. They spun it, and they put it back here, so I couldn't get to my locker. And they were just standing there waiting for me to walk in, and they would laugh in their face. So I was like, and then I had to do it all on my own, like change it. It was funny when I was doing it, because it was just stupid. Just watching me push a locker.
Yeah, they used to pull like weird pranks, like they'll take everything out of my bag, flip it inside out. But it was funny because I had one of those bags that like it was reversible, so even if you flip my bag, it still look normal. But for those who didn't, it was pretty funny.
Yeah, that was only one of many things. But like we always did something to each other. I think in our group, we're all even. I remember one time we went to drive around to a golf, and we all got the same amount of plays using it, and then we all got our baskets, and then me and my friend, we noticed one of our friends, he had a smaller basket than the one that we were supposed to have, and he was about to go to the machine and start filling his basket with the balls. We knew exactly what was going to happen, so we decided, let's be quiet and watch all things. So as it was filling up, we started the video here, and halfway it's about to get full, like when it's just a bit hit the top, we then told him, mate, you got the wrong basket, it's too small. And then straight after we said that, all these golf balls just started pouring out of his basket, just trying to scramble and grab them.
Yeah, just waiting on Tim, guys, but I think he'll be here in any second. Like I just said in the chat, I'm seeing lots of good improvements in your drawings. It's really good, like in your Ferrari drawings. Feels like people are starting to get it a bit more and get it under control, which is really good. So like while Tim's not here, like has anyone got any questions or anything about any stuff? Online people, you got any questions? I can't believe it's week 10 already. Yeah. 2 more weeks, that's it. 2 more weeks of the whole year. Well, then you got presentations. So you got 4 weeks. Week 14. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Yeah, so you guys will have week 13 off, and then week 14 is your presentation. So, yeah. Any other questions? You guys going all good in all your other stuff? Everyone's flailing. It always gets a bit. There's always lots of stuff to do. I'm just going to talk about one thing really quickly, right? Like, and this is like, anyway, let me just say it, right? I think for next year, really try and get your butts into CDW, right? I will preface this by saying, I noticed this year we didn't do as well in the rookies, right? I think that's exactly because people are not coming into classes. Right? There's something going on that you miss out on when you don't come to classes. People that are online, like I've done it too, like I've done online classes and stuff, it's not the same as when there's people there and you're like, kind of accountable, and you got the instructor there and you can talk to them and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I think for next year, you guys try and get all that stuff sorted. That's just my big tip. I think anecdotally it makes like quite a big difference, right? And yeah, I think we can see it this year. Like kind of you guys in the third years have kind of had it pretty shit because it's been COVID all the time. So yeah, and it's just not as good. But yeah, anyway, is what it is, I suppose. At least you're still getting through. Hey Tim, how you going?
Hey, how you going?
Good.
I'm good. Just checking out what people are doing.
That someone is me, Bronte. So just send an email. Just email over to Jasmine. I'm sure you got Jasmine's email address because she sends you about 4,000 emails every day. So just email her back and you can talk to you. So if anyone wants like a chat with me, just feel free, email through, and I'm more than happy. That's what I do. I love, like, all I want to do is get you guys through the course and get you working as industry professionals. So yeah, anything we can do to help you, we're always willing to. All right. Tim, not so much. He just wants to kick your ass drawing Ferraris. That's all.
Yeah. I just love telling people how to draw ellipses again and again. That's what I do.
You guys like
Yeah.
Duncan and me and that are laughing because it's like literally every goddamn class. Hey, it's like, what is going on? All we do is we just sit here and like, your ellipses are wrong. Your ellipses are wrong. I see it in like the female. I'm like, oh my god, another person got their ellipses wrong. But you guys are just in one class, right? So you don't. But we're doing it like 3 times a week. Yeah. It's like, how many times can you tell someone to do this before?
That's like, what do you do for a living? Well, this will sound silly, but yeah, cool. No, there's heaps of good stuff here.
I was just
like
saying to the class just before you got hit, Tim, that I was having a look through, and there is a lot of really big improvement, which is great to see. So really good.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, cool. So I mean, at this point, it's mostly just like everyone's probably at that stage where everyone's probably like a week behind or something, and it's just important for you guys to make sure you try and get the get the main bulk of it that we can help you with sort of sorted before it all sort of before we sort of finish here, which I guess is
before it ends.
Still got next week and the week after.
Yeah.
You know?
So I was just saying to these guys, week
so
10 this week, we got to week 12, and then their presentations are in week 14. So they've got a week in between, Tim, to kind of like get it all resolved. And, you know, we're a little bit, we're professionals at this, so we all know that you guys will like spend that entire week without sleep and go from not having it done to having it done, which is, you know, good. But yeah, obviously the more you can get it done in the class, the more we can give you feedback and the better your end result will be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, cool. Well, I'll try and like drag these in. I think that's probably the best thing. I'll just sort of give some people some notes. Mostly, again, you know, we're just going to be seeing things like this, like Aaron. Just grid seems a little bit sort of wobbly, right? Grid is like not quite lining up with itself, and we can see some of these lines are kind of not quite matching up with the grid. So it's like, again, there's probably like some stuff like this where I reckon if you try and add more detail, you might sort of run into trouble. But if you keep drawing and you render it, it'll probably look pretty nice, right? Like the wheels look better. But yeah, the main thing there is it just feels like everything's kind of a little bit off the grid, right? Like the grid is not really matching sort of stuff. But the drawing itself is looking a lot better. Yeah, with this one, I just feel like everything's sort of in a good spot, but the lines are all a little bit sort of rough, probably. Like if it's going to be hard to know what to trace, right? Like how to extract some good lines from that. So there's going to be like a range of things like that, and then there'll probably be some where, again, most things are kind of sort of there, and it's just a matter of sort of finessing details. But yeah, I think probably there's going to be a lot of people. One of the things we probably should talk about is how to get that sort of final line quality, because I do see a few people sort of struggling with that, right? Like, because I guess it's one thing, Simon, to say like, the line quality needs to be good, but the question is like, why, and how do you sort of get that happening?
And I think once again, like all you guys, like
which is a
from,
challenge.
I think once again from like first year to second year, like you guys are really improving with the line quality stuff as well, because we have been banging on you for a while about that. So yeah, just keep going. That's all. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I think it is. There's nothing you can really do besides draw a lot to kind of improve that stuff. But in many cases, there are sort of, just sort of general principles involved. We can sort of talk about some of those. So where did we get to? That was Gemma. All right. Oh no, that's where we started. Then we went up. Is that all of them? Yeah, there was another one, because I'm assuming some of these ones are from previous weeks.
Yeah, once you get down to Lewis's, like from last week.
What's that, sorry?
Oh, once you get down to Lewis, it's from last week. But yeah, if anyone wants to upload quickly, go for it.
Yeah. Upload if you need to. I'm gonna swap my my Wi-Fi, because I just realized it's probably gonna start flaking out because it's raining and stuff.
It's a bit pixelated on your end.
Yeah, is it? Yeah, I need to fix that.
It's called Telstra, Tim.
Yeah, no, I get it. I signed up for NBN, and the guy came, and on the phone they were like, yeah, no, we'll fix it all, but yeah, the phone cable has not been used for a while in my house, because I had other better internet than the phone line for a long time. So it's behind a bookcase, and I'm like, well, it's behind a bookcase. You'll figure that out. And the guy's like, nah, I need a plug. I'm like, bye. So yeah, I have to figure it out. I have to get some guy to go on the roof and figure that out. But yeah, which actually isn't a huge problem, but I'm just, if it sort of works, I tend to not worry about it. Cool. So Brianna, we've got this one from here. Nice. I like the detail you've sort of put in there with all of the working out and stuff. That should help us heaps. Cool. So again, car looks a little bit sort of distorted, not quite sort of, not quite 100% similar to the ref, but that's all right.
Yeah, we spoke to Lewis about that one last week.
Yeah. I think that's the same one. And yeah, I think we already have sort of talked about this stuff. Cool. All right. So now I need pure ref, don't I? That's what I need to.
You trying it?
I should have downloaded that yesterday. No, I'm like, I should have set that up. It's like, which is slower, me doing it by hand or me trying to download Pure Ref?
Probably just do it by hand.
Figure that
this
out.
one.
That's my plan. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's just with line quality stuff. So much of that is just sort of being more conscious every time you try and create a line or a ellipse or whatever, and just really sort of thinking about what is the proper way to do that, right? Like, how can I best make that line? It's something that, you know, that you find different ways to make all those different lines, but if you're just in that mode of sort of, you know, just draw it, right? If your impulse is like, no, I'll be okay, you know, just get in there and sort of sketch around and stuff like that. Yeah, you probably won't be able to get the clean lines, right? Because often when people are getting those clean lines, traditionally they're using a lot of tools. And again, it's hard to understand that because I think in Photoshop, we talk a lot about this, Simon, again, just the attitude and the mentality you guys probably have because you're not coming into drawing with a traditional mindset. You've probably started drawing digitally in many cases, or started, you know, being serious about drawing when you're doing it digitally. And I'm sure you drew traditionally, but normally what happens is when you start getting serious about drawing, you know, back in the 50s, is you start to get more tools, right? So, you know, you have if you're in school, you know, you have your protractors and all those sort of things so you can draw right angles and do that sort of stuff, because that's what you need for geometry. Yeah, when we're sort of doing it here, it kind of can seem like traditional drawing, right? I.e. not using 3D or, you know, tricks or cheating or, you know, whatever you want to call it. Like traditional drawing is just, it's like your pen, right? I feel like there's like that puritanical view of it a little bit, where we maybe are viewing now like traditional stuff as sort of this situation where, you know, it's unassisted, but drawing all those lines traditionally has always been very assisted, right? It's been sort of assisted as much as possible. And that sort of would just always occur with different sort of tools, right? So no one would try and, you know, draw ellipses by hand from a finished sort of line point of view. They'd always be using ellipse templates. And I think we've sort of gone over this, you know, many times sort of in class. Like, yeah, and they'd use like French curves. You had the thing like the thing that I kind of had that was probably like more high tech was sort of the flexible curve. Yeah, get that up. Right. So yeah, you have this giant, you know, paraphernalia set of stuff that would help you do drawing, right? So you'd have like your flexible curve, right? Your sort of French curve set, your ellipse template, and we're already about $500 worth of stuff, right? This is serious tech. This is serious tools. These things are, you know, designed to work and function day in, day out. If you got a good set of these, you know, good set of, you know, pens or something like that, it cost you $500. You know, those old sort of rotating pen sets, right? So one of these, you know, like a big sort of set like that. Again, you know, this is like a fairly small set. You know, these things are expensive. They're kind of complicated. So the flexible curve is just like a French curve. So I'll just sort of dig into these to give you guys an idea.
It's just
again,
it's just a ruler that
variety
draws
of-
curved lines. Yeah, so you can
Yeah.
mold it. So you just like say you're drawing car or whatever, you just Like, yeah, you just curve it around, and then this is a ruler. Yeah, so you can curve it into any shape
Yeah.
you want. Yeah. So just so you guys know, like, Tim's not talking about like 80-year-olds here. So when I was
No.
when I went to uni, I had to have all this stuff. So that Rotring set that Tim brought up, we literally had to have that plus the compass and protractor and the flexible curves and the French curves and the ellipse guides and T-square. So I had to take a 1.4 meter T-square on the bus every day. Yeah, you guys think you got it bad with like a laptop. Holy shit. Like, so you'd sit on the bus with it like in between your legs and it'd be sticking up like into the thing, you know, and we'd go on the bus and then all of a sudden, you know, all the industrial design kids, because I've got the like protractor stick it up on the bus. And then you had to have like massive sheets of paper because like you're doing perspective. So like we're drawing cars and toasters and all that stuff like in traditional. So like there's, you know how you guys are going to zoom way out in Photoshop to like get your perspective grids in? Imagine doing that with paper. It's really fucking awesome. Like, so we had so what we'd worked out after a while is that you would get like an A3 sheet of paper, but then you would sticky tape all the other sheets of paper to it. And then when you finish, you could fold it all up. So then it wouldn't be like, you know, you wouldn't have to take it on the bus, whatever, you just take the A3 sheet, but it'd be like all folded up. Yeah. And then we used to so for rendering, right? Then we used to I should show you stuff, guys, like things that I did. So we used to use like color pencils, and
You need to bring it in.
yeah, color pencils, and you like shave off all the color pencil, right? And then you use cotton buds, and you can get like gradients, and I could get like perfect gradients. Yeah, work out how to do that with like tissue paper and cotton buds and stuff. Yeah, and like this is like year 1999, you know. Yeah, so like, yes, I'm getting old, but it's not like 80 years ago. Like, this is the shit that you had to do. And then you get the masking fluid. And then, so all my first assignments that I did for illustration were acrylic paintings, like watercolor paintings, acrylic paintings. So I do like all fantasy paintings and, you know, yeah, not that long ago. Yeah, like all this stuff has changed really fast. Like this is, you guys are probably like the first generation where you could have potentially just like never drawn on paper if you want to. Like, yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, because like my daughter's 13 now, she could easily just have never drawn on paper at all, right? Like, she had an iPad by the time she, you know, since she was
exactly
born. Yeah. So it's like kind of crazy, but this stuff is not that long ago. But yeah, these are all the tools that you had to buy, and like, you guys don't have to buy textbooks and all that stuff now. You have to buy a laptop, right? So that's like that's your tool. But we used to have to buy all this stuff, and then that would literally be like, this is your textbook. And then Copic markers. Yes, I have those, and I can show you guys how to use all of that and lay them up, and I can get like a pretty much like a you can make this stuff look freaking amazing. Yeah, I won some like design competition. I've still got the magazine in the, what was that old design magazine? Design Studio Press, no, Design something. There was like a really famous magazine, and yeah, I've got a thing in there that I did all in markers and everything. That's just what you used to do.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. No way comms.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, you'd have to do that. You'd have to like you know, have markers plus graphite. You know, you'd take a pencil and you'd shave the, you know, scratch the pencil off, and then get you know, mask it out with bits of paper, and yeah, you know, then you'd use the tissue or the cotton bud or the cotton wool to kind of again get the smooth gradient. So
I used to paint.
you know,
I used to paint cell art like on acetate. So we had this whole system of how we'd do it. So you'd ink it on, you know, paper, and then you could photocopy it onto like that acetate, and then you'd have to do it upside down and back to front, and then basically you paint on the back of the acetate in gouache, and then you have your anime character when you flip it over. Yeah, I used to do all that shit.
Yep. Wow.
I had this whole system for like when I wanted to do watercolors. So you'd like ink. So I'd want to do like comic book stuff in like watercolor things, you know, and so you'd like, you'd do your drawing, and then you do your inks, and you'd be like tracing all of this off. You'd like just trace it off on all different layers, and then you do your final ink layer. And then what I used to do was I worked out that I could do a photocopy of it onto like watercolor paper, and then it wouldn't bleed and stuff because you're the way it photocopy. That is, yeah, it's pretty cool. And then you could paint on top of that. I don't know if you ever did that sort of stuff, Tim. Probably did as well. Tim died.
Oh yeah, sorry, I had myself muted. Yeah, I went digital really early. I probably
Well, the thing is, you're
Probably
like
like-
you're like 2 years younger than me, right? And
yeah,
that
makes
kind of
a
made the difference. So like, I did when I was at uni. I was literally like the first person that ever got a Wacom tablet there, and I think that was in
Yeah.
my 3rd year of uni. So like you just couldn't get them before that. It was like no such thing. And then they came out, and then they were like super expensive at the start. But then like the next couple of years, they sort of like dropped down in price. And probably you, Tim, you were probably like, you could probably sort of get one like the first year of like studying or whatever. That was maybe a thing that was like kind of attainable.
Yeah, well, I'm a bit different because I had one of my friends in high school was a really talented for high school sort of level art sort of manga artist. He was sort of like Japanese, and like he'd sort of been born in Japan, and so he had all this manga stuff. Like I watched Princess Mononoke like on VHS tape, you know, like when it first came out in Japan because his relatives like just shipped him one. You know what I mean? And there was no dub, it was just in Japanese.
Yeah.
So, you know, and he got a like Bondi Blue iMac, right? Which I think the only way I can trace back when this was that it was he got one of these things, and it was like 99, I think, that sort of came out, or like 98. And yeah, he had one of those again from, you know, he sort of got it. I think they sent it to him from Japan or something, and he had a Wacom tablet with that. So in sort of 98 or 99 or something. Yeah, and I didn't use it. I used it a bit, but I didn't have one. And then I think eventually he sort of gave up on it and gave it to me. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to become an artist. I think he started playing guitar or something. But I inherited
also
this like old thing.
There was also this thing before the Wacom tablet, and I don't know if you guys can look it up, but it was called a digitizer. And basically what it did, it was like this like handheld scanner thing, and you could you could like kind of scan your art and get it like straight into the computer. And that was like, that was unheard of. I never had one of those, but I always wanted one. Because that was the first thing. That was the first thing of like being able to get your art onto the computer. Yeah, because you could color stuff like, you know, not that old, computers were around, right? So you could use the mouse and things, and you could use Photoshop. So you could color stuff, but like you couldn't get it into the computer. So like you would have to draw everything with the mouse, right? And that was just like, even everyone sort of knew, it was like, this is dumb because I can just draw it. But you couldn't just get your camera and like take a photo and put it. That's like impossible. It just didn't exist. So when you kind of think about the future and, you know, how things have changed, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's like that's how far that's changed. But the fact is, when you're drawing, you still need to be able to get right, like curves and precision and stuff like that. And that's the trick, right? Is you know, those techniques are still very just hand-eye coordination based, right? Like that side of it doesn't really change that much. I think a lot of people kind of think it does. And it might sort of appear like, oh, you know, I'm doing digitally, so, you know, that there must be a whole bunch of, you know, tricks that I can use or whatever. You know, I'm not suggesting people really think like, oh, there's sort of easy tricks to use. But I think sometimes people, just sort of have a slightly skewed version of it in their head, right? Of like what this evolves. And I think the thing is that the more the sort of the non-traditional drawing approach moves, the more it just moves to 3D, right? So, you know, insofar as there are like sort of skills and things that you can kind of outsource to computers, I think that in many cases, what people are going to do is that's all just going to be 3D, right? So it means that you're always just going to be left with having to do it more or less completely by hand when you're sort of doing it, when you're actually just trying to draw it and have your sort of, have it feel like it is a drawing. Yeah, so I don't think that's ever going to change, and I don't know whether anyone's going to sort of create like, a digital version of like French curves, or because the technology and the will is just not there. But you can see like things that that people do use to help this is like, Procreate has a lot of that mouse smoothing stuff on it, right? And some of these software programs have a lot of that, where basically you can much more easily create smooth curves, right, by turning on. And I think the brush is like, it's just the smoothing thing, right? So that's something you can think about if you are trying to get very sort of like smooth lines. But I think what you find is in most cases that is in itself a skill, right? So if I've sort of got if I've got that kind of like line, you can sort of turn on your sort of smoothing, right? And that sort of gives you that sort of, I guess, what it used to be called, like sort of lazy mouse or something.
Yeah.
But it basically interpolates the line. And so that is something that can be worth thinking about. If you are sitting there trying to be like, okay, I need to create, like sort of one of these long sort of lines here, right? Is, use the tools that you have, because that's what they're there for. And even the best artist is not necessarily going to be able to kind of wing that in one go, right, without any sort of assistance, right? And I think often I'm a bad example of this because I spend so much time doing this stuff that, yeah, like my sort of hand control is normally pretty good, but that's not where most people spend their sort of time and effort, right? And
just quietly, because Tim won't say this, but like, he's an absolute freak at just Tim's a freak at just drawing lines in Photoshop. I'm not sure if you guys know this. Like, I can't do it like that. I just will be like, line tool. And like, I'll just use like the French curve things. Like, I'll just do all of that. I'll do, like, if I need to draw a car like the Ferrari, I'll just make curves and transform them and try and get like straight lines and do it like that. Whereas Tim just like draws it out. But just remember, it's like Tim's done, like when you draw comics and things like that he's done like a lot of drawing in Photoshop. So it's like, it's not like this is like 15 years of 20 years of doing this all the time, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I know
I started really early and like using Wacom tablets, and I also tried to do line drawing in Photoshop very early on, right? So again, I don't think I was the first or anything. That there's been a long line of people creating art digitally. I think like classically, I think like Fred Beltran in France created some great sort of humanoids, sort of comics in 3D, way back in the day, in sort of the late sort of 90s and sort of early 2000s that kind of were really good. But I think in many cases they still scanned the line drawings in. It was like 3D stuff plus lines that was sort of scanned in. But yeah, I mean, I don't know who was doing this first, but I do remember back when I tried to draw the Ara comic, which I would have started thinking about that in 2007. And I was sort of looking around and I was like, is this possible? And no one that I could see was doing it, right? Like no one was drawing stuff digitally. Like no professional was drawing lines digitally.
Just so all you guys know, like we have other people out here to do master classes and stuff. And Tim was like, why are they drawing like that? Because they're just like chicken scratching around like I would do. So,
yeah, a lot of people
we're talking about
of...
like, yes, they do that. Tim does not do that ever. Do you guys notice that? I do that. Tim doesn't do that, right? So like, yeah, just
Yeah.
Tim's
Or-
very,
or the other
very,
thing
very
people
good
do-
at doing that.
is there, and this is, I guess, probably good because those techniques are probably more reliable, right? Is you can totally just chicken scratch it, right? Like that, as long as it's accurate, that won't matter, right? Like I think that's kind of fine. And actually, what that was kind of called is like it's called petting the line, right? And that was sort of something that people. This was actually a really good technique, and I think sometimes people use that technique because I used to work with older rubbisher Wacom tablets, right? You used to be able to kind of build up the line a bit and kind of make sure, you know, it kind of had a particular quality to it. Whereas, sort of, now I feel like with a Cintiq, again, you can just get the line straight. The other thing people tend to do that I notice is that they are sort of going to be more likely to sort of just try and do it in one, right? So they're going to sort of be, right, they'll try and sort of get it over with, right? Like, I don't want to draw this line. So they'll kind of just, you know, try and sort of do it quickly. And then, yeah, they might sort of erase some of that other stuff, right? But they're going to sort of try and, you know, like sort of draw this thing fairly quickly. But yeah, so again, I've had a lot of practice at this, right? I started sort of earlier than most people were trying to do it. And when I was starting, really, you shouldn't have done that. You would be better off doing it traditionally because the Photoshop tool wasn't very good, right? It didn't have the smoothing, you know, and it would always do that thing where every now and then it would basically just go, whoa, 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 whoa. And you didn't have control. The Wacom tablet was small, the screen was small, and you can't really like it was really sort of like, why did I do it that way? So it takes a long time to develop those sort of hand-eye coordination skills, right? But the key is that when you're sort of thinking about, again, how to do that line, I mean, a big part of it is also just, you know, now, I think what happens is that the more experience you get, the more you're going to sort of sit there and kind of say, okay, I've got to make, you know, I've got to make a particular line, right? I've got to sort of, you know, get a particular thing going. How do I do that? You know, and a lot of that is going to be the rotation, right? It's like figuring out, you know, like, okay, I need to get that line there, right? Now I need to get that line there. The other thing that I don't do, a lot of other artists will do, is I don't rotate as much as most people would do. Because I started and there was no rotate tool, so I couldn't do that. So I sort of just took that on the chin, and I would just sort of accept that, you know, if I had to draw a line, you know, from like here to here, that it would basically just be a little bit wobbly, you know, and so my style just sort of just had a bit of sort of wobbliness in it, you know what I mean? Because I'd be sort of drawing lines sort of straight up and down, and you know, they'd be a bit messy, you know what I mean? And I'd sort of, you know, but now the tools are a lot better, so you can sort of do that. But I noticed that most people will advocate sort of right rotating the canvas. That certainly is like a lot easier. And I'd say I'm probably very good. Like I'm good at doing. I'm okay at doing these times. Like Tim's really good. I'm okay at that. But I'm really freaking good at not having to rotate canvases, right? Just being able to like sort of draw lines, right, from like sort of either side of the canvas, right, and having them. And again, it's sort of, these ones are like sort of okay, but if you kind of, right, sort of warm up, just being able to sort of say,
for example,
let's like a line from.
For example, guys, I see Tim draw the perspective grid lines freehand. I'm like, please don't ever do this. And then I see you guys do it in your like in your things. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Right? And Tim does it in class. He's like, just draw him like, Tim, what are you doing? Just use a line tool. But you know, Tim just likes doing that, right? And he's trained for ages to be able to like kind of do that. So but like, if the thing is, it's like you can't get a straight line. Like, don't do it. Like, you'll practice that over time, but you know, like you grid lines and stuff.
Exactly.
Just don't do them freehand.
No, that's very true. So keep that in mind. Again, I'm often not very good at sort of being conscious of that. Yeah. So again, my attitude towards this is I'm one of these people who does it the hard way, and like most things, and I'm like, if I keep doing it the hard way like this, I'll get better at it. And that often leads to a lot of kind of not being good at some things for a while. But yeah, it does take a while. And for me, I'm just like the more I sort of draw stuff on the screen, the more practice I get, right? So, I just feel like for me, it's like the more I do it, the better.
Yeah, and
Anyway.
Ella, like I saw your comment about like this is why the perspective grid in Procreate exists.
Yeah.
There is amazing perspective tools in Photoshop. So I can get a photo, click 3 dots, and it'll make a perspective grid in 1 second. All right. Yes, we know that, but we don't show you that because we want you to draw it all up. Yep.
I don't know that.
And it's not
Yeah.
because, yeah, I know, sneaky stuff. But it's not because like we want it to take a long time. It's because I want you to understand what you're doing, how it works. Because if you don't understand this now, you will never work it out. You will never quite learn, what's going on. Like there's so many people that I see that just keep drawing outside the cone of vision and things, and just like wonder why their shit doesn't work. It's like because you just stuffed it up from the start, like. But, and you'll see like professional stuff all the time that's like that. Just like, they don't quite know what they're doing, So we want you guys to kind of do some of this stuff the hard way because it teaches you like the reason why it all works together. Does that sort of make sense, guys? So yeah, there is like heaps of tools and stuff. And it's not that you can't, like, I think they're great. Use them. Use whatever tool you can. It's just like Tim was saying, like even traditional guys, Sid Mead, he'd just use the French curves and do all that. He's not like drawing the line by hand by himself. He's like using a ruler all the time, That's why it looks really good. So use as many tools as you can, but it's about the understanding of stuff, right? Like when you got to do the perspective grids by hand and the cone of vision, all that stuff, you start to understand like how it all works and how it fits together.
Yeah, people would get crazy dexterous with those drawing implements, the French curves and stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like people would be able to draw sequential elliptical things. Because, I remember like one of my teachers at TAFE used to do those like diagrams, right? Like, like if you've ever looked at like a car service manual or anything like that, where it's like, here's like 1 million bolts that are coming out of like 1 million other bolts, and there's things are kind of flying everywhere, like exploded diagrammatic views for cars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you just be able to sort of, I don't think he was a great artist or anything like that, but he just kind of knew how to be like 1 ellipse, right, like 2 ellipse, and he would just it would just be like bang 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 bang, and he would just kind of get it. And they just get really good at kind of like move the elliptical guide, do your ellipse, move the elliptical guide, do your ellipse. Right, and they get really fast with it. Same with those French curves, right? It looks like the first time you use it, you're like, what? How do I do it? Right, but the professional is like spinning that thing, right, like crazy, and just like they know where they're like, oh, that's the curve I need. It's probably at this part of the curve. Just like spin it over there, like get that, and then yeah, often like to do a line, you'd have to use multiple parts of the curve. You have to like reposition it and stuff, and people get really, really, really fast and proficient with those things. So no matter what tool you use, we're always going to get that proficiency with it. Yeah, I would really recommend against relying too much on those perspective tools. Yeah, just because I think at the end of the day, you're going to be creatively limited by whatever it does, right? It's the thing that is hard to understand is that the technology formats you. And I don't think people realize the degree to which this happens, right? The degree to which they kind of accept what the computer program does, and then they just work within those sort of limits. And, sometimes that's good because what you want to do is within that, but sometimes it's kind of like, it's sort of not, right? There's some things that are very forgiving within particular sort of mediums. And again, if you can always get good results, but you don't always have flexibility, right? Again, unless you sort of work on the more foundational things, if that makes sense. So if you really learn the perspective, it'll be easy to use those grids and cheap sort of you know, the aids in Procreate or whatever, you'll understand exactly what's happening with them. But also if another tool comes around that kind of works different, or, you know, gives you a different sort of result, you'll very easily be able to adapt to that. You won't be sort of in a situation where you're having to, you know, be like, oh, there's one checkbox that doesn't work exactly the same way in my new thing, and then I don't know how it works. Or, you know, the other thing is drawing over stuff in 3D is often very challenging, right? You know, people are like, oh, do it in 3D and then I'll draw over it and that'll be easy. And it's like, not. Again, the better your perspective is, the more core your foundational stuff is, the easier it'll be for you to just add stuff. You know, like, oh, I want, this is, I guess, the best way to explain it. You're working within a perspective grid in Procreate, and your creative impulse says, oh, I want to add something to this, right? I need to push this shape here or that shape there to get this particular effect. If you understand how to use perspective, you can move outside the boundaries of the tool and make that change, right? Confidently and easily, almost without thinking. If you don't know that, then what will happen is you say, oh, it would be cool if I did this, but it's too hard, and you won't do it. And you just keep doing that. And over time, the accumulation of you not listening to your creative impulses and instead just doing what the tool tells you to do will kind of start to format your creative imagination to begin with, right? You'll be like, is that going to work in the perspective tool? Is that going to work here? Is that going to be easy? Is that not going to be easy? Yeah, and that can be very sort of damaging long term, right? And obviously, like, you know, that might not be a terminal thing. It might just sort of mean that, you know, maybe the stuff you do has a particular look. But if you follow that too far, then yeah, you'll find that as the technology moves on, you get left behind, right? I mean, the best example we always use, Simon, I think, is that, you know, we knew a lot of people who were into video games, right? And, you know, they were good, you know, they were professional 3D modelers. And, you know, they had careers, you know, doing sort of low poly modeling, right?
Yeah.
And if you guys sort of, I'm sure you guys kind of know what that is. Now it kind of looks, now it's kind of all cool because people do it from like a retro sort of sense, right? But as a metaphor for how to understand this, because to me, I think like this stuff is so important, right? Understanding how this sort of stuff functions. And again, that's kind of like, you understand what I mean, obviously, by low poly modeling, right? If you sort of remember like how these things kind of used to look, right? How games used to look, for example, you know, you'd sort of look at your like sort of Quake guy, right? So that's sort of what stuff used to look like. And then it kind of
Pretty
got,
amazing.
you know, like a bit better, you know, it sort of looked like this, or actually it looked way worse than that. This is how probably everyone remembers it looks. Yeah, I'm sure it looked like way worse than this. So, and this is not to be like the Simon and Tim talk around the fire about the old days. The key is that when there's, I guess, the primary value we can provide is sharing with you some of our experience, because once you see some of these things happen, you really see the traps, right? It becomes very clear. And that's why we kind of say, like, yeah, don't use the perspective grid, right? Now that's a principle for me, is like, don't use the tool first, like understand the principles behind it, understand the theory and the concept and the core stuff, and do it hard, right? Live life the hard way. If you live life the hard way, it's easy. If you live life the easy way, it's hard, right? That's all you need to know. But the reason we're saying this is we've kind of seen it, and we've seen people get in big trouble from a career aspect by having that attitude. Yeah. And it can seem like, oh, this is cool. I just need to do this, and this, and then I can get the result I want. And it's like, that's a great attitude to have. but there are dragons there, right? And this is an example of that. Is I feel like back in the day, like when me and Simon were trying to get into video games again in that sort of same early 2000s time frame, this is kind of what 3D sort of looked like, right? It looked a lot like sort of Quake 3, and sort of these types of sort of 3D models, and they were getting sort of better over time, right? And you would sort of look at sort of things that sort of came out, right? Like your sort of like original sort of Metal Gear Solid, which was on, I think, like PS2, something like that. And again, I'm just contextualizing this and making it visual. I don't mean to kind of keep showing you guys stuff, but a lot of people kind of are like, oh, you kind of imagine what that looked like, but it kind of actually looked sort of different, right? So again, this would have been, like back in the day, this looked super high end, right? Like all of this sort of Metal Gear Solid 2 stuff on PlayStation 2. And people were kind of moving from the Quake sort of stuff, right? And this was kind of the style, and now it was like, oh, but we can actually do some of those details in 3D, etc., etc. But still, people didn't understand the level of detail that would be coming up, right? Does that make sense? So it was sort of inconceivable that games would ever look like the latest Metal Gear Solid, which was like, what's that? Metal Gear Solid 5, was it?
I remember the other day I saw a video about Grand Theft Auto, and when the original Grand Theft Auto came out, like we were all just like, holy crap, the graphics on this are like so amazing. Like I distinctly remember I played it for like hours and hours, and like it was so good. And you like look back at it now, it's like, oh my god, it was like a disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that was like GTA 3, right?
Yeah,
that was like because there was already these older Grand Theft Auto things. So yeah, I mean, I'm just contextualizing it because this is literally what I'm sort of talking about. So this is when we sort of got into video games, and again, I feel like all of these are actually just mods that make it look better because I know it looked kind of pretty crappy. But this was like, oh my god, this is amazing. Everyone was like flipping out.
It was literally like you thought that person was realistic.
Yeah, it's so real.
The jump up in graphics from what you had was just so big. And like I remember thinking that person there looked realistic. Like how could you ever make it look any better than that?
Well, they've actually got textures. It actually looks like pants.
Yeah.
But again, at this time, the point is, again, me and Simon were kind of looking for work, and we understood the pipelines. We understood 3D, how it was probably created. But no one at this time understood that, again, this is sort of what games would look like. Does that make sense? Like, people thought it would get better, but I don't think anyone sort of thought it would get this good. And I think it's really the concept of normal maps, right? It was the concept that you could get geometry to render as like a normal map in the GPU that kind of really changed the look of this. And that, again, sort of started to happen. I think it like Weta was sort of doing that in films. And that really allowed you to start to be like, oh, now you can have like ZBrush, right? Because ZBrush didn't exist back then, and the concept of sculpting didn't exist back then. It was all 3D. And people didn't know, and they had no idea that 3D artists in the future would primarily be working in ZBrush to create these types of characters. And so I know, and Simon probably knows as well, many artists who were working, in Australia, and they were doing this type of stuff, right? And what they were probably good at doing was this, right? So their skill set was probably designed for this type of thing, right? Like the kind of like old Doom sort of thing where you do a very, very boxy model, and then you kind of put textures on it, and that sort of makes it look real. But the actual thing under there is like 5 polygons or whatever. And they were kind of like, whoa, you mean I have to do this? That's crazy. You've actually got to like model, the thing, and that's sort of crazy. and they just didn't really understand that this is where it's going. And so what you had is like a lot of people who were working in the industry who kind of didn't have any actual sculptural foundation. They didn't
That's just
think about.
That's just what I was about to say. Is like in the Doom thing, there's no anatomy in there. You're just making boxes look good, and then you paint a texture on it
Yep.
to make it look like, you know, the arms have muddy arms in the corners, right?
Yeah.
They weren't like, and because like Tim's right. Like I know some of them. It's like they don't know their anatomy, right? So the people
Yeah.
that went on and like
didn't need
learned
to.
anatomy, they ended up having like a job in the industry. But the people that didn't, guess what? They don't work anymore doing art. You know, they do other
Yeah,
stuff.
they don't. Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're showing you guys is like, if you know the really strong fundamentals of things, then you will always forever have a job doing art. If you don't, then it makes it really difficult. Because the tools and the
And that-
programs and all that
that's
will
the cool
change.
thing.
But yeah, if you're just a good artist, a good designer, then you'll have a job forever. If you're not, then you won't, right? But you guys are all good. You guys are all like way better than what we were doing when we were going to uni,
Yeah.
because like
No,
no
no.
one was teaching us this stuff. We had to like find this out the hard way on our own.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think that it'd be the same thing looking at like, you know, your sort of Crash Bandicoot, right? Something like that, like Crash Bandicoot 1, which again, you know, looked really, really good for the time, you know, and you sort of compare that to, you know, Ratchet and Clank or something like that, you know, now where it's like he's got fur and stuff. Yeah, it was hard to imagine how that would be possible because you know, people that like movies didn't look this good, you know? So it was just, everyone just thought games will always be stylized. You know, we'll get better at making them feel real, but they'll never be real. And so a lot of people sort of got in there and they kind of were focusing on the job and the application of like, you know, how do I make this easier? Right? They're like, how do I make this easier? How do I make this more effective? Right? And a few people might have made the jump to like this level, right? But most of the people who are really good at this stuff, right, just aren't good at this because it's a completely different approach to how you create the model, right? It's not sort of sitting there, you know, working from sort of concept art, right? It's like, you know, and tracing it, and there's like, you've got to manage the polygons. It's basically just like make it look as cool as possible. And then there's a whole technical pipeline for how you get that into a game ready asset. And again, like this stuff, right? The fact that a game would look like this was inconceivable to most people at the time. And the point is, yeah, they didn't focus on the foundations of their craft, which is like, I'm making stuff in 3D, therefore I'm a sculptor, right? I want to be a character artist and I want to create characters, therefore I should really study my anatomy. You know, it was always this kind of idea of like, oh yeah, I don't know, but you know, yeah, I feel like this stuff always comes around. It's always like, oh yeah, but we can have a, you know, there's this base meshes, so you don't need to know anatomy anymore. You just get a base mesh, and you know, like, who needs to model people anymore? And it's like, well, you need to, because you know that's what makes stuff look cool, right? Is an artist who actually understands the details of, you know, how people look and how to get them to feel a certain way, and really the only way you do that is to kind of understand, you know, the reality of it, the full detail, and to do it, you know, in any way you can. But again, no one was doing that. There was no ZBrush, so people would have to have taken up sculpting, right, or drawing. But in many cases, they didn't. They just focused on sort of the job and what they were doing, and yeah, it's just like if you don't focus on the foundation of your art and understand sort of what you're doing, it's just there's stuff that will happen that we don't know about, right? You know, and I think you know, in many cases, I would say, Simon, like similar sort of stuff happens where, for instance, in a modern sort of era, you know, a lot of people probably didn't learn their anatomy that well because you can just use base meshes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So people were just like, oh, you just kind of get a base mesh and kind of twist it around, and that's kind of good enough. But like now you can sort of have that like Unreal 5 character creator, right? Like the meta-human creator. And I don't know whether people have sort of seen that happen, right? Where basically, right, you can now in sort of 3D, basically just make characters by sliding sliders and stuff, in the Unreal Engine. And what that sort of means is, again, if you're not studying the craft, if you're not able to add value, right, on top of that, by, again, because I think what will kind of happen is, yeah, a lot of people are like, oh yeah, this is good. I haven't looked at how good it is. I mean, it's probably pretty freaking good, right? But still, I think all that happens is people just get used to this and they're like, none of these characters are interesting, and just makes it kind of low value. And then they go looking for like what is more interesting and more unique, again, because what's valuable is what's unique, and that will be the case in the marketplace too. So it just means every game is going to have fairly realistic faces now, right? Sort of created and sort of figures. There's going to be no excuse for having kind of like poorly constructed average people in a realistic game. And that just means anyone who is kind of doing that stuff where they weren't studying the craft enough is now kind of out of a job, right? Because they probably don't have the core foundation enough to kind of add to this and understand the character that they're sort of creating, right? And again, plus this and add value to it. So these things always come up, and
I like, just for everyone, I 100%, 110% agree with what Tim's saying. It's like, this stuff actually means you have to be a better artist. And I think it even means you have to be a better concept artist, and you have to be a better everything artist, because this stuff is just getting so good that if you can't match this, then you're just not up with the game. You know what I mean? So, for example, like you think about like Uncharted 4 and things like that, it looks a certain way. Let's think about what Uncharted 8's going to look like, right? And the concept art is getting better. The modeling is getting better. Does that make sense, guys? So it's just, you just got to keep, pushing. And like, that can be kind of scary, so don't think about that too much. But, but just, like Tim's sort of right. Like if you want to be someone that's not getting left behind, right? So, and the way to not get left behind is doing the same thing we've been doing for like 600 years, which is just doing the foundations and learning how to do art good from the basics. And then that means you can do the more complicated stuff better, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, because eventually those tools become available to you, right? The question is like, what's the most interesting character you can create using those tools? And I think maybe it's good you don't have to remodel, from a base mesh every time you do it, and maybe now it's like it makes some of those more menial tasks sort of, less important. But the key thing is, I think, always is to get at the core of what your job is. And the most, again, there's the technical aspect of that, like which would, for a 3D artist back in the day, right? They would be sort of thinking like, what are we trying to do, right? You're in Doom land, right? And this is, I don't even know, is that, I guess that's the Quake 3 guy, isn't it? Doom guy, Quake 3 guy, right? So you have to understand that at each time, right? What are we saying, right? At each time, what have me and Simon been saying? We're saying people saw these things and they're like, that's so cool, right? People saw this thing and they're like, oh my God, that's awesome. You got these guys flying around in Quake. If you've ever played Quake 3 or something, it's like, what's going on? There's just a whole bunch of people blowing each other up nonstop, right? But the key here is that these things had an emotional response to people at the time because they provided an experience that they couldn't get anywhere else, right? When you're looking at that sort of like Quake thing, there's nothing else on the planet that gave you that, right? That gave you that 3D environment where you could move around that fast, right? Because the trick with Quake was you could do it fast, you could zoom around. You couldn't get that, right? It's a completely novel idea in the history of humankind that you could move that fast and think that fast. Does that make sense? And Quake 3 is the same. It's like a game, right? It challenges your hand-eye coordination. and the shapes and the excitement and the feeling of kind of what it was were just there to kind of be like, let's make something cool with these tools, right? It's the same thing here. What are the tools we have, right? How do we make something that looks, interesting? And at each stage, people looked at these things and they're sort of thinking, it's, people are just like, that's cool. That looks awesome. So at its core, the job is actually the same, which is that you're creating characters that have an emotional response. And in Quake, they don't need to have a huge emotional response, but the point is you're like serving the audience and you're trying to get them to have a good experience there, and that's the thing that sort of doesn't change. And that will never change. That is actually the point. And so you have to understand that that's what you'll be doing when you're sort of dealing with like modern character creation, is the skills you have to build are probably like, a lot of sort of traditional sort of ideas of how a form functions, right? You can maybe learn those in ZBrush, you can learn it through clay, you can learn it through drawing. But as me and Simon say frequently, the thing that often makes people good is they have a very solid understanding of what they're doing. So your kind of Aaron Becks of the world that we always kind of sort of use as an example, right? Does like, really, really cool mech stuff and, knows a lot about mechs and technology and cars, right? And they kind of understand that sort of stuff, right? They understand that. And I think people who are going to be really good at creating characters that people respond to are going to be really good at understanding characters. Do you know what I mean? At understanding what makes them interesting at its core. And that's the thing that will carry through. The tools you need to sort of develop for that again is mostly an interest for like human anatomy and how different sort of facial features work, right? And again, you can build that through drawing, you can build it through traditional sculpture, you could build it through ZBrush, right? But the key is people understand the form, they understand characters, they understand the anatomy. And so that's why, again, the core foundational knowledge is what will kind of see you through. It's important not to get distracted by the tool that will allow you to kind of do that easier, right? Because again, that often just means that whatever you're doing, whatever tool makes easy just becomes not valuable, right? But the core, but beneath it becomes valuable, if that makes sense. I just say it's like most people kind of figure this out and they're kind of in the mix and they're sort of doing it. But again, as me and Simon have sort of said, is like you see the awesome people on ArtStation and stuff, right? And they're the people who are really passionate about this and working on it. There's a lot of people who sort of had jobs in games doing this, or had jobs in games sort of doing something else, or sort of doing stuff that maybe was a bit like this, where it's like I'm just modeling sort of average background characters, and it's like now you don't have a job, and that's kind of terrifying. So the key is to understand that what you're always wanting to do is sort of understand the core foundations, because those are the things that you can guarantee will kind of see you through, right? We don't know what will happen in the future, but we do know that, again, if these people had sort of studied their anatomy better, right? And if these people had, thought more about sort of sculpting, that, they'll probably still have a job here, right? And whereas people who are just kind of like, just sort of leaning on the tools, often get left behind a little bit more. And that's kind of just it sounds really Darwinian, doesn't it? So
moral of the story is get good at your perspective grids and draw in perspective.
Yeah.
All right, back to Ferraris, Tim. Back to Ferraris.
We should probably take a break and then we'll come back, because I'm sure people are like, we've been going for an hour. But yeah, and then I'll do some like solid feedback on these. But I do think that, again, like part of we can teach you this stuff, but I do think that discussing those other concepts is super important, because to me, like when I see that, like that's super obvious, right? Because I've seen that happen. But I remember being back there, being like completely unaware that that would happen. You know, I just thought that all those people who were doing that 3D stuff were really amazing, and you know, they kind of knew what they were doing, and you know, yeah, it was kind of sad to see a lot of those people kind of not really do art anymore, you know, and not be able to sort of keep up, because I feel like, yeah, they just sort of didn't have that sort of foundational, constant sort of improvement sort of idea, or they did, but they just never really figured. I think a lot of people know that. They just can't find the time, right? They haven't worked it into their life. They haven't started early enough. Do you know what I mean? It's really, I get that attitude towards it, right? Because I think more than anything else, that will kind of serve you through your career, right? Because who knows what will happen in the future, right? It could just be, you know, again, you put on your VR headset and just imagine it, right? And it kind of happens. But again, the core thing there will be like, who can imagine the coolest thing? You know, and I think a lot of the time, what I said is very important, is that if you allow the tool to format your imagination, you don't struggle through it and try and create, you know, the thing that's exactly in your mind, as opposed to like what the tool will let you create. You're always sort of limiting your own imagination, right? And your own sort of thought process a little bit. And then, you know, when people move on from that, you're kind of, yeah, you're in a particular formatted shape. I know that sounds super esoteric, but I think that's like very, very, that I just see that happen a lot, right? Anyway, I reckon we should take a break, and we'll come back in just a quick one in 5 minutes. And then we'll do some Ferrari feedback, which is why we're all here.
And I think there is one more new one posted up, Tim, as well, if you want to grab that one, Caitlin.
Cool. Yeah, I'll grab that for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. See you in a minute.
See ya.
If you could show me, yeah, diagram, that'd be great. Yeah. You mind? Sure. Yeah, I'll just quickly show you.
Yeah, well, come to the on me, I guess. So I'll just do it with the grid characters. That's fine enough, because they share a sort of background anyway. Whatever.
But I think I'm guessing you're in there.
Just finished the. I just want to focus on getting my characters to be better rather than just smashing it. I feel like I did better last week. I feel like this week's characters are a bit yeah. Maybe I should pick five. Yeah, how you going?
Yeah. My last one was there. Because I know he said like, oh, you know, just get your references, take a nice sound, sure, whatever you want. Like,
Yeah.
like, I don't know what I wanted. So then I was like, oh, best man. He gave me like 1 to 2. So I've just been doing that, but then just trying to like recreate it and like other poses. But just go. Maybe
so surprised because yesterday was quite nice.
I mean,
It was like
I
24
started the
something.
day wearing a jumper, and by the time I got because when I came in storyboarding, I was walking in the train, it was like 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Man, it's a bunch of boiling. So,
I think next house is going to be 28.
Okay, let's do some feedback notes. Cool. So yeah, I can't remember whether we went over this one last week specifically in detail. I think we sort of went over the general idea of it, and we sort of got that sort of drawing here. Yeah, so the main thing that's sort of happening, I'm just gonna increase that stuff so we can see. Yeah, so you can kind of see here what's happening with those ellipses.
I think.
Lewis,
Hey, Tim.
if we sort of look at that sort of final thing, yeah, you sort of you've got the ellipse here, and you've got that sort of we've got this kind of like minor axis here. This one looks a little bit better, but it still feels like these are not quite equal. Right, so it feels like, again, if we sort of look at this angle, that a bit smaller. Yeah, so if we sort of look at this angle, like what I want is that to be more at right angles. Right, we're going to see something a bit more like that, if that makes sense. So I feel like the minor major axis is a little bit off there. It doesn't feel as if these are kind of 100% symmetrical. So again, if we make our ellipse, and we let's make that slightly, again, need to stroke it smaller. Make that into smart object. Right, so we can kind of see there that this just doesn't seem to be at the right angle, right? It's just a little bit sort of rotated that way, and we just need it to be more like that. So that'll give us the better kind of angle on those. And again, we can kind of see here, these ones kind of look a little bit better, but again, not 100% angle right, and again, not sort of going through that center, right? It's a little bit sort of down. So again, this one's pretty good. But yeah, but I think what you'll find here is that this one back here is going to be slightly more open, right? I think that might be one of the reasons why it's looking a little bit sort of funny. Now, again, these are all things that you can, choose whether you want to kind of fix here. If we sort of look at that here, right? I can sort of see that that's kind of the center line you've sort of got going there, right? And this is working, right? We've got the general idea of the perspective going. It's just a matter of where that ellipse goes, right? Because this one just seems a little bit sort of misshapen. So again, it's just going to be a matter of we that up. Right. Again, I'm like one of these lines is not quite 100%. Because it just doesn't seem like that's kind of lining up 100%. That's my bad. But I'm just going to go with the center one anyway. Right. So again, we're probably going to need something, again, that's a little bit more rotated. And again, this one's going to be sort of very similar, whereas this one here is going to be, again, smaller, which is sort of fine, but it's also going to be a little bit more sort of open than what you've got. Now, again, how you sort of get that, I feel like we've covered this like plenty of times, but again, it's a matter of trying to fit, because again, the question is like, how do you know how much more the ellipse is sort of open on that side? And I think that's where that box does give you a quick guide. Again, it's not going to tell you exactly where to place it to the millimeter, you know, but it'll give you a pretty good idea of sort of where to place these things. Now you've got the box there, right? So the question is like, is it sort of being used? And if we sort of hide all these, right, I can kind of see that the box is sort of there, right? It is kind of being sort of utilized, but if we kind of reduce the opacity of these, double check some of those things. All right. You know, I'm going off your previous, all right, sort of drawing there. I'm not going off my new one. All right, seems like you kind of have, again, line something like this. That's sort of roughly, that sort of seems to me sort of what is sort of there. Again, and I can kind of see you've kind of carried that across, right, which is awesome. And you've sort of got that kind of measured out there. Right, we've got the side, right, and that does seem, again, that's very rough. I'm just putting that in there. All right, so I can kind of see that this is kind of here. Sure exactly where that's sort of sitting on the ground. But yeah, I'm just not 100% sure like whether this box here is exactly where it needs to be. I'll probably have to check that, like double check that if we were to go into detail. So one of the things that's happening here is that these lines are pretty large, right? So it's hard to find accuracy. So the lines you're drawing it with are kind of cleaner, but the underlying lines are a bit rough, and it means that sort of, you know, it's very hard to know where you kind of place these sort of different sort of objects, right? But I think that the main thing is just to pay attention to like what we can see here, right? If we sort of, again, sort of draw this box, is we can sort of see that it's, right, we're seeing the side of it a little bit more, right? And especially, again, sort of the far side, right? So yeah, if we take all of this off, right, it doesn't quite feel as if that box back there is kind of like really matching up with this one. I think a lot of that could just be due to, it's pretty close. I think a lot of it is just due to the size of the lines, right? The size of the lines are making it very hard to gauge from one side to another, right? Exactly sort of what's happening there. So if we sort of look at, and I'm not sure, again, whether this is like sort of the same one that you sort of had before, because again, that shows those kind of like finished lines. This one here, I think, shows these. We've sort of got these. Yeah, not entirely sure where the center of these are. Yeah, so okay, so the top one is new, the bottom ones are old. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so again, I'm going to say I feel like a lot of this is sort of happening because just the lines are pretty small, are pretty big, right? And I think they need to be a bit smaller. But sort of if I track this over here, right? Like I can see you're drawing the boxes correctly, and that's why I'm sort of not just being like, it's completely wrong. I'm like, is there something else we can sort of look at there? Right, because again, I can sort of see at right. So the question is like, where does that end? It's, yeah, it's like sort of there. Yep. Well, yeah, this one, so these are like, right, and these are old. That's what I'm assuming. Cool. Yeah, so I can see, the reason I'm sort of like, again, I'm sticking on it is because I can see the boxes are sort of there. I think one of the things that's sort of happening is probably, again, not sort of, you found that center, right? But again, finding sort of this center, right? And then just making sure that we're kind of matching, right, at all of those points. That's where I'm not quite sure some of that sort of stuff is happening, right? Like, is that something that's kind of happening over here? Again, it's hard to tell because I'm trying to find these sort of lines and the top of that, right? But again, I'm not 100% seeing that these are kind of really hitting or matching those lines. So, right, so if we sort of look at, to get pretty sort of fussy, right? So again, the question is like, I'm not sure those are square. I'm assuming they're sort of somewhat square, but yeah, I feel like what we need is to just make sure when we're sort of drawing these, right? Again, you've got that kind of purple line there, right? So that is kind of the right sort of size. But yeah, my feeling is that these boxes aren't 100% square. That's kind of my feeling. So we sort of like using them as sort of a guide, but I think they're going to need to be a little bit sort of different. They could be fine from sort of side to side, right? From like a depth sort of perspective. But yeah, my feeling is yeah, that one's kind of there. We can sort of get that one working. This one, yeah, it could just be sort of the depth is a little bit off. But yeah, I feel like we need this to be like a little bit sort of a little bit higher. Right now, again, what you kind of see is that again, the extra height is not really going to affect the feeling of those sort of wheels, but this is probably what happens when we just got these sort of big lines to kind of measure, right? I feel like if we, right, if this is like just a little bit kind of higher, then that is going to sort of work. So yeah, I just try and make sure in the future that we use slightly, right, slightly thinner lines. That will kind of solve a lot of those things, because I feel like again it's just like you can see that the difference there is like very small. Okay, if we just make that yeah, so yeah, it's sort of like in order to get it to sort of fit in there, we're having to sort of squash it. So yeah, I feel like there's just a little bit of stuff here that's kind of a little bit off, right? Again, not 100% convinced that that is sort of as square as it could be, but yeah, mostly it's just use bigger lines. Sorry, smaller lines, thinner lines. Right. And again, it's tricky because I feel like you're doing some of the stuff right. It's just that yeah, some of it is kind of not as accurate as I think it could be, and that's sort of causing some of these things to sort of fall apart. And yeah, always keep in mind that you can tell, right? You can tell a lot of these things are happening by just prioritizing the minor axis. Right? That will show you in other areas. So if you see that the minor axis sort of side of it is not quite lining up, it means that maybe some of these boxes are not quite there, or we're a little bit sort of off. But you can see that this wheel here sort of looks a bit squished, right? All right, so technical term. but yeah, so again, that's something you can sort of tell and just be like, okay, like what is going on there? But it's tricky because there's lots of things that could be the problem there. It could be the lines are a little bit thick, so you're just making compounding sort of errors. It could be that this is not 100% square, etc., etc. There's a lot of things there, but I can see like that. You know, a lot of the working out looks good. Right, we just need more accuracy, basically. I think again that's going to be the case for a lot of people in a lot of cases. I think that's up to you. Again, I would try and sort of at least figure out what's happening with the wheels. I'd sort of make sure that at least they're kind of lining up with the minor axis because again I don't feel like that's happening, right? I feel like the minor major axis is kind of off. So they're not at sort of 90 degrees to the axle of the car sort of wheel. So I think that's important to fix. Once you've sort of got that fixed, I reckon some of the other aspects of it are sort of looking good. And if you want to move on to rendering, I would sort of say go for it, you know. But yeah, just sort of be aware, like you've got like a little steering wheel in here, right? Like let's try and think about, you know, try and think about like where that is, right? Again, that's on its own sort of little wheel axis, right? Again, I don't know what type of steering wheel is. I don't think it's round, but yeah. So there's a couple of things there, right? Where you know maybe it would be good to have like you know the seat and some of those other right bits and pieces in there. I forget whether you were sort of purposely trying to go for like a very sort of simple version or not.
Yeah, can I just chime in a bit, Tim?
Go.
Yeah, I think, Lewis, like one of the things that I want you to do is just really keep thinking about the proportions. So I think what you're doing here, the perspective stuff, Lewis, is like, I mean, from the start of the year, it's improved probably like 3,000%, right?
Yeah.
Like everything's looking pretty good. So now when Tim's giving you feedback, he's like nitpicking feedback, right? So that's awesome. But the thing that's still out quite a bit, Lewis, is the proportion. So that's the bit I think you should work on. And I'd rather you like do a simple one, but has the same proportion as the Ferrari than rendering it up where it's like not quite right, Lewis, because that's the biggest thing with you at the moment is you need to train your eye to see proportion. So when you do figure drawing and stuff, that's the thing that's always like, you know, that's the thing you need to work on the most is always seeing the proportions, Lewis, right? So I don't know if you've got, can you just quickly, sorry, Tim, can you just quickly go on Flow and do you have that there? Like just the, yep. And can you go to like, just go to like, one of the ones where there's the little orthographic thing, like go George Clark there. So, cause I know that, go back. Yep. Go George Clark, open that one up. I just know it's in that one.
Yep.
Wherever that opened. Okay. Go down a bit. Yep. This.
Yep. Got this thing.
Yep. That thing right there. Right. So that's the bit I want you to look at. Do you see the top one with the red squares around it, Lewis? Right. It's a lot longer than what you've got. So yours is still looking like a wide Ferrari, right? But the proportion is very different. That's the bit. So now you're working on your perspective. It's looking good, right? So the bit that you got to train in is now seeing those proportions. So just put this next to that. Can you see how it's different? Like the Ferrari from the reference looks really long. Yours looks really wide, okay? So yes, now you're drawing it all really nicely in perspective, but the next bit you got to work on is the proportion, and that's the bit that's going to flow into all of your art, right? Like at the moment, you know, when you do character designs and stuff, the proportions look a bit funky. So it's just training your eye to see that. And if you're doing that in figure drawing, like you're looking at the reference, train your eye to see proportion there, and then you're looking at things in this boot camp where it's the Ferrari, train your eye to see the proportions there. So I can see everyone's really starting to get the proportions working better, like, you know, in all the examples that we're looking at today, Tim, like it's really starting to get there. So keep doing this part, Lewis, like try to get that. It feels like that's the bit that you missed. You haven't measured how long the Ferrari is and how wide the Ferrari is. And for some reason, you don't want to do it, right? For some reason, you just keep putting it off. You're like, should I go into rendering? You know, it's like, no. Because, I mean, you can, right? But it's just never going to look right. So you just need to keep getting those proportions, like block it out, you know, get it on the ground, and do those things, and then it will look better, right? So maybe for the next couple of weeks, Lewis, like just try and do that. Try and just be like, okay, I need to learn how to, even if you don't get a finished rendered Ferrari by the end, like I don't care. That's not going to affect your grade stuff, right? Like try and work on seeing and getting those proportions right. Like that's the most important thing. If you can do that by the end of this like year, that'd be awesome. That's it. That's all I've got to say.
If anyone's wanting like some simple exercises to deal with that, because again, this is something that like it is a big challenge for some people, the proportion. I would check just whether like, what is your ability to replicate proportion when it's not in 3 dimensions, right? So, you know, just try and sort of like, can we sort of, firstly, like, can you trace this, right? And get a feel for, right, like what this actually looks like, right? And then just sort of say like, well, can I sort of replicate it, right? Like, can you actually just replicate it here? And it's like, I can sort of see it here, right? So it's sort of, you know, I can sort of start to gauge that, right? And you're just gonna, by doing this sort of thing, you're just going to train your brain to start sort of trying to look at that proportion, right? But then go and sort of, you know, when you're sort of doing it, see if you can look at this and then sort of replicate it, right? Sort of, you know, okay, I've got like a wheel here, got a wheel somewhere over here, right? And then this sort of bit sticks out, and then I know it kind of goes here and somewhere. I'm like, I can't remember how far, but I think I remember from me doing it that like back here, like the engine is kind of, because I know that is like where the gearbox is, and I know that's where the wheel is. I know there's like engine here, right? Exhaust manifold there. I know that this seat thing's got to be kind of a little bit sort of further here, right? And just try and keep replicating that proportion, right? Then try and maybe do it the other way, right? So it's sort of, right, it's you're drawing it from the other direction, right? And try and then be like, how did I go? Like, did I get this, you know, did I get it even remotely right, you know? And then just keep doing that. The reason I would say to do it this way is that you can iterate really quickly, right? You can see what's going on. So if you're having trouble doing it in 2 dimensions, right? It's probably much more of a core perceptual thing. And all that's happening is that you sort of have your brain, right? This is sort of representing your brain, right? Not the best drawing of a brain, right? And then you've sort of got your eye, right? And then you've sort of got your banana finger hand, right? Holding a pencil, right? And the trick is like these things are not communicating with each other effectively, right? So what's sort of happening is that often we're sort of, you're seeing something, right? So we see it and it goes into your brain, right? And then your brain processes that information and tells your hand to draw Ferrari, right? This is 100% scientific. Not really. That's a joke. It's 90% scientific. So the thing to understand with all sort of proportional stuff, and you can study this with life drawing. You can study this kind of with, like Betty Edwards' Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain is sort of the classic book that talks about how your left brain can basically interfere with what you're doing, right? But there's a perceptual thing that happens, right? So you see the Ferrari, right? And then that goes into your brain, and your brain says, that's not what a Ferrari looks like. I know what a Ferrari looks like. A Ferrari looks like this, right? Giant wheels, and it's short. And your brain's like, nah, bro, don't worry, I got it. I'm gonna tell this hand to draw the Ferrari, right? And then you get this. Because your brain's like, no, the wheels are heaps bigger. Trust me, right? It's like that shit friend of yours who's just like, no, man, it'll be cool. We'll do it. No, and then hilarity ensues, right? So the trick is, right, and this is one of those things that I would consider one of the true talents of drawing, right? If there is a talent of drawing, some people just don't have any problem with the interpretation from eye to brain, right? They see it, and then their brain is just like, of course, that's what a Ferrari looks like, right? Why would you ever draw it any other way? Some people see the Ferrari, right, and then you're interpreting it. So there's a lot of logical reasons why that would occur, and everyone's brain sort of works differently. It's not a deficiency, but if you have sort of a direct link there, it does mean this stuff is way easier automatically. And I think some people are just, for whatever reason, you can say maybe they just practiced it early on, maybe it's genetic, maybe it's like whatever it is. Some people just sort of come out of the factory very, very good at just drawing what's in front of them, right? And again, you've probably seen that sort of, Simon. We've got sort of hundreds of students. Everyone's at a different sort of range, and some people are just really good at that. Mm-hmm. This has nothing to do with being able to draw from imagination, right? So typically people can be very good at this, and then they go to draw something from imagination, and it's like complete train wreck, right? So it's part of drawing. But the key is that there's an interface between what your eye sees and what your brain perceives, right? That's well sort of documented, and it's not as direct as we would like to think. So this is why often when people are you're sort of drawing a face, right? And you sort of got right. We've sort of got our sort of eye, and people will sort of still draw the eye, right? Like it's kind of this almond-shaped eye, right? This is kind of normally what happens. People are like, I'm going to draw, like, again, the eye of Horus on this kind of face. And people will often do this, right? Even when it's sort of from the side, right? So people will kind of be like this. And all that's happening is that your brain is saying, this is what an eye looks like, right? It's like, again, there's some foul-mouthed drunk in your brain when you try to be like, oh, so that's what an eye looks like. And it's like, this is what an eye looks like. It's like this, God damn it, because that's the iconic eye that I see in my brain. And it just constantly interferes, right? It's constantly, you're trying to draw the form you see, right? Which is based on, again, the actual kind of, structure of the eye, right? And, which is, going to be like, much more like this, right? And it's sort of structured on 3-dimensional. And all that happens is your brain is just like, eyes are like this. And again, it's an iconographic representation of the eye, right? And our brain's very good at that, right? So the trick is to kind of just practice going from like what you see, right? And trying to just filter that message, right? So you see something, and you try and draw it, and you sort of just practice. And again, you get better at this. At sort of the filtering process. Now, for instance, the reason I know this is I'm not very good at drawing stuff from life, right? I'm much better at sort of drawing stuff from imagination than from life. I don't do a lot of life drawing. I'm not that interested in it, and it's not one of these natural things that sort of comes to me easily. But things that can help is, again, just sort of repetition, because when you repeatedly show your brain that it's not doing it properly, it will correct, right? It's quite good at sort of figuring out how this functions. And all it is you really just need to start routing your sort of drawing perception through sort of different pathways, right? That's not scientific, that's a metaphoric explanation of what's going on, right? But things that have helped are when to basically, and the reason we sort of know that it's based on, again, the iconographic version, and that's sort of what's happening, is that often you can take people who will completely, again, draw the wrong proportion. But then if you kind of take the, right, if you sort of take the thing that people are kind of copying, right, and you sort of say, copy this, and they basically draw like a really weird cartoony character that sort of isn't there. But if you sort of tell them to copy it, but we sort of flip it upside down, they immediately do much better. So this is why, again, from the scientific point of view, it's just observational, because no one actually knows how the brain works at all. Complete mystery. But we know that what's happening is that there's perceptual information to do with things that we recognize, which are interfering with our ability to actually draw what we see. You turn it upside down, and then we've removed our recognition of what we're doing, and you can actually much more easily draw what you see, because there's nothing linked to it, right? It's more like you're trying to sort of copy, again, an abstract impressionist sort of piece, right? It's like, well, all you have to do is just look at the negative space and the positive space, and you just get much better at actually looking at what you see. Now, again, that kind of helps you, but yeah, the key here is that often we just have stuff that's interfering with our ability to understand the proportion. It can also just be that you kind of start, right, thinking this is the right proportion, and then you get one little measurement wrong, and all of a sudden the wheels turn out to be 10 times too big, right? There's a lot of things that can go wrong. But I would check this, and this is worth everyone sort of doing, like, what is your ability to actually just sort of draw something that isn't in 3 dimensions with accurate proportion, and then replicate that proportion? Because if you're really messing it up, it's a good sign that, again, this is something you need to practice. And again, a good way to practice is just to copy stuff upside down. It sounds really silly, but that's, if you read Betty Edwards' Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, that's the methodology she uses to take people who everyday people who really suck at drawing. And you can get them pretty good kind of in 8 weeks or something like that, by just getting them to copy stuff upside down. And it just trains their brain to draw what they see.
Yeah.
And then they
once again, like, a lot of hardcore scientific evidence is like, because we've done lots of still life painting and stuff. So at the moment, Tim, I'm holding up my white coffee cup, all right? And if I get everyone to, like, stop what they're doing and paint this now and pick the color that this coffee cup is, most people, like, I reckon 60% of people in the class will just start painting it as a white cup.
Get out the white paint.
Yeah, get out the white paint and away you go, right? But if I go around and stand around everyone, I like slap their wrist and go, it's not white, what color is it? And they go, oh, it's that color. I'm like, no, what color is it? Right? And like, they will eventually choose the right color. Does that make sense? This is what Tim's saying. It's like, your brain is just lying to your hand. That's all that's happening. This cup is like, gray. It's kind of like a warm gray, but it's white if we put it in full light, right? And I bet $1,000 that everyone in the room can get the exact, close enough, near on close enough, the color that it is, if they actually look at it.
Yeah.
Think about it for a minute, and then pick the color that they want to paint. Does that make sense, guys? right? But we do a bit of like red Ferrari. It's red. But if you look at it, it's like, nah, it's not, right? It is in a, in a studio lighting setup vacuum. But once we've got the real world, it's not. And it's the same with the proportions of things, right? It's just, you just kind of look at things going, that's what it is. And then I just do it. But you're like not actually looking at it. Yeah, does that make sense? And for everyone that's getting some things a bit like funky, like that's all you're doing. All you need to do is just like, slow down and just think your way through things. You know how to do all the stuff and just kind of work at it. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah,
Keep going,
totally.
Tim. Sorry.
Yeah, it's and that's what when people get really good at still life drawing and stuff, that's kind of what's happening. You're just if you look at the mind of a painter, they're just constantly like, what value is that? What how do I mix that paint? How do I get that? What am I actually looking at? And it's just a different sort of way of looking at the world, right? And it's once you start doing this, if you guys have done a lot of sort of still life or done a lot of life drawing and stuff, you kind of just start walking down Rundle Mall, right? And you're looking at the tree and you're kind of thinking like, what's the HSV value of that shadow? You know what I mean? Like, how would I mix that with paint? And that's just what happens is you kind of see something and then you just kind of see the paints that you would need to mix to get that, if that makes sense. Or those warm shadows or cool shadows, is that reflected light or is that local color? Like what's going on there, and you just start to see it a bit more like that. The same with proportion. Instead of just being like draw, you're going to be more like sort of, okay, this bit's here. Okay. And this bit's here. And like, where is this bit? How do I figure out where this bit goes? It's like, oh, it's halfway in between this bit and that bit. Right. And you just do that. But eventually that becomes a very subconscious thing that happens, right? You're just kind of like drawing and you're sort of thinking about the proportion, and it happens a lot quicker. But yeah, initially it's very easy for that stuff to go pear-shaped. Anyway, we should we'll keep going with these because I feel like we sort of talked about that stuff enough. So this stuff is sort of looking okay. This one, I'm not sure. Where's this wheel? Right, not quite sure because this one feels like, and again, I think this is one of those things where you've sort of we've kind of drawn this box, right? Right, we've sort of got this box, but where does it end? So I think that the concept of like where is, like, this is the proportion of how big it is, maybe. Where does it sort of start and stop, right? Like how wide is this?
Can you just go back to George Clark's for a second? Just go back. Like Alt Tab
to this one.
Well, yeah, to the proportion thing, yeah. Oh yeah, that. All right. So Daniela, if you draw that on the ground, you can't stuff it up. Does that make sense? Yeah, like you will just get the proportions right, because then you've got the width of the tires. So what Tim was talking about is like you don't quite have the width of the tires, so they start looking a bit fat, right? And then all the proportions feel a bit weird. So now you got the height, because the other week they looked a bit short, right? But now they look a bit like wide. Yeah, and it's just, you can see you just haven't quite done that bit. So you don't know where to bring up the tire from. Does that make sense? Yeah. So just, try and spend a bit of time, like construct it on the ground. And I bet you'll do heaps of like, oh, oh, right. Like, I get it. Yeah, like what Tim's doing now. So when we don't see that drawing that's on the ground, like, I don't know, like Tim and I are more than happy for, this is for everyone, not just Daniela, right? Like Tim and I are happy for you guys to go as rogue as you like. You can do it all like this, but you'll just fail. It'll fail. It'll just be fucking shit all the time, right? Like it just will. Just keep doing it, and you just keep redrawing it and keep being like, why does my Ferrari look like a piece of poop? Right? If you do this step, you will not fail. Does that make sense? Like, if you do this, you won't fail. Like, Joe just said it in the thing. in the collaborate. Duncan's done about 4,000 draw overs of the same stuff. You know, Manon's doing the same thing. Hamish has done this bloody orthographic thing. It's like, I don't know. Do we need to like stand over you guys and like whip you? You know, yeah. So it's like kind of working out in your brain like why you don't do that, right? Because if you do that, if you do these things, it's like kind of hard to not get it right, if that makes sense. But each week it's improving, Daniela, right? Like each week it's getting better.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm not like angry and having a go. It's more just like, okay, next step is try the bit on the ground. See if that will like fix up your proportions and things, or you see something like, oh yeah, hang on, that's really gonna help me do that. Yep. So to see how Tim's like drawing the boxes, like the front, you know, especially on that front
just trying
wheel,
to get those.
to see how it looks like the front wheel doesn't fit inside the box anymore, like it looks too wide. Does that make sense? Too deep? Yeah, and if you do it on the ground,
it's kind of...
Yeah, if you do it on the ground, then that helps everything. And then the next step for everyone to do is like, and I know like Duncan's been going off on a lot about this, is get like the center line through your car. So get the center line through your car, because like I would say 80% of people are just having a really hard time with the cockpit, getting that right. Yep. And it's just because, remember the boat? Can you guys remember all back to the boat exercise where you had to draw the round bit on the top of the boat? It doesn't look like any single person has done that. All right? We've shown you how to do it. Just, it's two tops of the boat. That's all. There's one lower and there's one high, and you just like, right? It's all got to like line up. Just get all the bits to line up. Just draw the grid out on top. Just remember, it's all from a box. Everything's from a box. Just draw your box you want the cockpit to fit in, and then get the curves right. Yep. So just going from like one side to the other and do your boat. So the same as that, like the front of the car, Daniela, as well, is like while Tim's drawing over notes and things. Is like you're just winging a shape there. You know what I mean? You just draw, you're just going like, I think it's like kind of there. But remember the boat, right? You can draw a box around it, measure the points, do your dots, and then you just do it. And then like, to me, like, I'm not sure, like, I mean, Tim does this a bit where he's like, where he'll like kind of wing stuff and just draw it till it looks good. But my brain, like Tim and I are like, our brains work completely different, right? Like the opposite end of the spectrum. You know, for me, I'm just like, wouldn't I just like measure that out and then I draw it once and it's done? I was like, don't ever have to do it again. And if I do it right, it's like completely correct. Does that make sense, everyone? Like if I get that measurement right, it's done, it's correct, and I never have to worry about it again. Whereas like heaps of you guys are having to redraw this stuff like 12 times. You know, that's what makes the thing take so long, you know? So like...
Yeah, there's a lot of people who I think it's natural to want to find that efficiency and go like, surely I can get this done without doing that. But yeah, normally it just takes ages.
Yeah, and it's like, I can see it on people's wheels already. I'm like, all you guys are just winging a wheel, like the rim, you know? I'm like, does anyone want to measure that out, please? All right, everyone's just like, star shape, done. Right? It's like, you can measure that, guys, right? It's like, make sure they're all the same on each side, the sprockets are all the same, like, just measure all that out. Like, yep, it's going to take a while, but you don't have to redraw it 85 times. Does that make sense? Like, if you just do it kind of right in the first place. So, yeah. It's the same thing with like everything. It's like, as you get better as an artist, like all this stuff takes way less time because you stop making mistakes, right? So I remember, Tim didn't see this one because I think we went to New Zealand, but I distinctly remember seeing Rob Rupel paint. He did like this demo. He's the slowest painter I've ever seen in my life. I'm just like, I saw him paint. I'm like, what is going on? Like he just sat there and he was like, stroke. And then, so the guys in the room, they can see what I'm doing, but I'm just like, you know, moving up and down the canvas, and then like another stroke. And then he would literally like lean back in his chair, another stroke. And he'll sit there and I'm like, we're not going to get any demo done. You know, because I'm like running the show and I'm like, oh my God, what is going on? And then like within 3 hours, he had the painting done. You know? Why? because he made no mistakes, right? Like he just, everything he put down was just like in the right spot. Yeah, he was doing one of these. He did it in like 3 hours. And like at the start, you're just like, where is this going? Like, I don't know where's it going. But all it showed to me was just like, he was very accurate and measured in what he was doing. He had this like process down. They would just follow that through, and he knew that the outcome would be good if he just got all of that stuff like correct in the first place. Like that's what he'd do. He'd just block in, get those shapes working, you know, do all this. So it's not about like doing fast lines, trying to do all this stuff, right? Like it's about trying to be accurate, and that'll save you heaps of time. Does that make sense? Is everyone understanding that? How like with this Ferrari, like if me or Tim was drawing it out, like we'd be done in a day. You know what I mean? But for some of you, this is literally taking you like 8 weeks to do a Ferrari. Does that make sense? And hours and hours and hours. It's not because Tim or I draw faster than you. Does that make sense? Like the physical activity of drawing quickly, we're not doing it any faster than you. We're just making like less mistakes. And we've shown you all the ways to make less mistakes, but you've just got to like buy into how you do all that stuff. And then the more you buy into that, the more less mistakes you make, the more you'll be able to draw everything in life that you want to do from now on in, like the easier and the faster it'll be. And it's not like it is
worth it. I think that's the thing. It's hard to trust that like this is going somewhere, you know?
And it's not like I expect you to just do what I said just then and then next week you'll be good. Does that make sense? Like this will be a long journey and a process. It won't just happen instantly either, right? But you've just got to trust that. Like just do little bits. And I think, sorry, because I got a bit of a rant from yours, Daniela, but I also want to say that like yours is improving heaps as well. Like the proportions are starting to look good. It's all looking good. These are just these next bits, you know? And I'm just like, oh, if you just did it this other way, it'd be so much easier. Like, I'm like, why are you doing it the hard way? Like, so for everyone, the hard way is just like winging shit. All right. So even like the seat and the steering wheel.
It never works. It never works.
The seat and the steering wheel and the bar. How do you do the bar? It starts from a box, right? That triangle shaped bar. Don't draw a triangle. Don't draw a triangle at the start. That's not how you do it.
So
how do you do it? You do a box. You start with a box. And you just measure in. I want it to be in this much this side, this much the other side, and you just construct all that. And then it's done. You don't have to worry about it again. You're not going to get me or Tim going like, oh, your lips, the way you measured this is, you know, you just do it right. But it's hard to just remember all of those bits, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're thinking about the cockpit, again, the important thing to understand is this is why the ground plane is important. So, you know, what I'm trying to find is like, well, the reason we put the center in is, right, I can sort of find that center up here. That's the center line of where this needs to be. Now, what I'm also trying to find is like, well, where does this cockpit, and again, this is tricky because I'm just doing this diagrammatically because I haven't properly found center, I don't think. But I think it's kind of probably like sort of here, right? We sort of got two sides here, right? So I think it's probably somewhere around there. So yeah, the key thing here is like, well, I need to locate, and this is where it often feels like, really, this is a long way to go. But yeah, we need to locate each side of where, right, this sort of arc is going to go on the ground. And we need to then make sure that those are mirrored, right? So that the distance from center here, right, is measured on the ground, and the distance from center here is measured on the ground.
From one to the other is even, because otherwise how do you know where to put it?
Yeah. And what that is right, is it's this distance and this distance. So we're measuring those out. Now, you will find that after a while, you can probably guesstimate that, and it's not going to make a huge difference, right? So I've got like, you know, one proportion here, one proportion here, one proportion here, right? Look, as long as that's pretty close, it's not going to make a difference. That's the thing. So like if you get good at measuring and you do those exercises, you could probably guesstimate that like, oh, that looks good. That's not the critical thing. The critical thing is actually just to find it and find the structure of where it is. Okay. And so now we're going right sort of this way, right, in a similar way that we're going down on the ground. And all we're trying to do is to find exactly this thing that we had on the ground here, right? So we were talking about, oh, you find this on the ground plane, and we sort of said, well, the main things are like the wheel, but also you can pay attention to the fact that, like, you know, this thing is, you know, this type of curve, and you can see how, again, the sort of riveted on sort of body structure is like sort of similar. You can plot out where those things are, and you actually do all of that stuff via ground plane to begin with, right? So I need to find out, okay, along the center line, right, how far does this curve come out, right? So it's sort of coming out here. And again, I'm just being diagrammatic. I'm not being super accurate, right? But basically, right, what I'm trying to do is I've got this kind of curve here, and I can pay attention right on the ground plane to the reference, because we're doing from orthographic. And I'm like, well, on the ground plane, how far forward does this come? And then I can kind of take it up, right? So I'll do it how you sort of got it here, but yeah, it's going to be very sort of similar to all those other things, right? Where if we just sort of put in a few points here, right, on the ground, right, you'll be able to kind of quickly, you know, do something that kind of feels like it's sort of a curve.
Yes. Does that make
Right?
sense to
And
everyone?
then-
That's like the key. So then, like, and also you can even measure the length of it too, right? So like, in terms of that second, the lower arc that goes around where it curves into. Sorry, it's so hard to explain, Tim, without drawing on it.
Yeah.
But like the second one is like that literally fits like 2 cubes down, you know? So if you've got your cubes, you can work out where that one sits. So if you go back to the orthographic, Tim, like sorry, I just want to explain this quickly because it's like important. So go back to this one.
Yep.
So the second blue line that Tim drew, or that hasn't drawn, so the one you haven't drawn there, yeah, right? So it's literally like 2 cubes down from the front of the nose of the Ferrari, right? And then you just know where to put it in space. But if you don't do that legwork, then all of a sudden you're winging all the bits, right? Does that make sense? And then your proportions get funky because it's in perspective. It's kind of hard to see. But if you get these things, you're just like, I'm like, I could wing it for like 2 weeks, or I could literally just take 15 minutes to measure it, and then it's in the right spot. Does that make sense, guys? But some of you, your thought process is all about us. It's all like backward. It's like, how can I make this the hardest I can possibly make it for myself? Okay, we'll do it the way you're doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do I make it the easiest way? It's like, do it the other way.
If you do perspective the hard way, it's easy. If you do it the easy way, it's hard, right? So the structure we're trying to build here, that's what sort of Simon's talking about, is like, we can actually plot, because this is where it becomes more useful, is we can sort of try and plot, right, this secondary sort of form here, right? Like what's happening here. And again, apologies, I could plot all this out, but again, it takes time. So I'm just being diagrammatic with it, right? But what we then have is like, well, okay, where's this body go? Where's the center line of the body? Which I should have found before, right? We should know where the center line of this body is. I know where the center line of that body is, right? And now I draw up from the center of that secondary
that makes sense,
structure here.
Yeah.
Yep, which is kind of here. So I'm finding basically on the ground, right? I'm finding like where this point is up here. Then I'm finding where this point is up here. And now I can quickly blend between them, right? So the structure that we're trying to find, right, is kind of like one. I'm just doing this diagrammatically, right? We've got one here. And then what I need is basically another one that's like a little bit bigger. And I'm going to find them right on the ground plane. Right? And if I have that, right, so that's kind of where that's kind of where lower down this one would be, because this is an easy way for me to sort of find that. And then basically I'm just going to draw, right, like a larger line here. And then what we do is we kind of just connect the dots, right? Right, and again, you could sort of draw through and connect the dots. So that's sort of what we're doing, right? We need to kind of find this line, right? And then we find this one on the ground. And this one isn't really a line. It's a structural point where this kind of joins on to the rest of the car, right? But if I can find where this is, and I can make sure that, again, that's the center line there, right? That's the center line there. That's the center line there. I'm finding these points, right? That center there, right? I draw this up. That's where that center is, okay? And now, again, I can fairly easily, right, use similar kind of marks to what I had there, right? And again, figure out, well, how much further down than this do I want to sort of draw it? And then again, more marks would help, right? I'm trying to do this sort of fast so I don't spend 3 hours just doing this. But then we find that one, and again, then we sort of join them together, right? And then you know, right, where that sort of center line is there, and then, right, you can kind of, basically when you come to render it, you're gonna have a much better time of understanding, right, like what's happening there.
Yeah, then when you do render it, you really understand the form, because you got all this construction underneath and you know how it goes. But does that make sense? Like, as in, if you've drawn any bits on there that you just made up, right, you're kind of just doing it wrong. Does that make sense? Is like, if you just wing some stuff on there somewhere, it's like, it makes it really hard. It makes it hard when you're rendering, makes it hard when you're doing your line work, it makes it, you know, but the more you plot all that stuff out, like, the easier it is, right? And I feel that, like, you know, Tim sort of says this a bit, it's like, after you get the concept of this, it makes winging stuff later easier, right? But until you kind of know how to do it, it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like, you have to like go through the pain and get the really nutted out how to do it like the proper way first before you can ever like kind of fudge stuff later. Does that make sense? Yeah. And I think it's mostly just because, like, when you train your eye to get better. So when you fudge stuff later, you know when something's wrong. And then what happens is you know how to, like, you know how to fix it. You know how to go back and find out. Like, if you know that, like, oh, hang on a minute, I just need to work out the ground plane and get this bit, and then there's only this one bit that looks wrong, and then you solve that bit. Does that sort of make sense? But yeah. And I hope this is helping with yours there, George. So it feels like everyone's really having that problem with kind of the cockpit, you know, and you can see you can see from how you draw it, like how your construction's going, that, like, you just haven't measured that bit, that's all. So yeah, so just like measure those things. Yep.
Measure on ground plane, right? And again, it's tricky because I mean, I think George, you're in a really good spot. Why? Because you have measured it all out.
Yeah.
Right. So the trick is, you're and we sort of got like some of these things, right? I feel like some of this, right? You're trying to wing some of these bits, right? So it's just a matter of, like, go through and start to define some of that secondary form and use the orthographic, right? We've got these orthographics, and, you know, like, I think maybe this one might be different to I don't know whether this is the one I sort of had or whether this is a different one TAs have sort of found, but, you know, ask these guys for this one, or, you know, if you want a particular thing, go get it. But yeah, you can really see, like, oh, okay, like where is this thing on the ground plane? It's like a little bit, you know, between here. Now, the thing that I think this is where, again, it's hierarchy of importance. I think the important thing is, like, it's not the most critical thing for you to get the distance, you know, from the back wheel to, like, where this thing starts, right? Like, obviously it can't be here, right? You can't have the cockpit sort of thing starting here, right? The steering wheel can't be over here. But, you know, as long as this sort of, you know, pit of the cockpit kind of is, like, it could be there, right? It could be there. That's not going to change the overall feel of it, right? But having it be all wonky does, right? So it's mostly important to understand, like, if you're within 5% of like a measure, like, oh, this needs to start this further, you know, this far back, or yeah, you can kind of see that it starts to kind of really curve up at the same point as the wheel stops, right? All those sort of things. you can eyeball some of the distances, right? So, you can sort of eyeball on the ground plane, like, because what you're after is like, okay, there's the ground plane, right? There's the center line, and, that's where the wheel is. And so you can kind of be like, again, I'm just trying to make sure, right? You can kind of be like, okay, that's where this thing's going to start, right? And now I draw my box, right? That's okay. Like, you can eyeball some of these things. You don't have to get out a measuring tape or anything, but like, obviously, this thing isn't going to start over here, right? It's going to start roughly here, right? A little bit back from, again, where the wheel sort of starts. But the problem is you can't look at like, where does the wheel start over here? Like, that won't tell you where this thing needs to be, right? But the ground plane does, because the ground plane sort of contains this squashed version of all the proportion. So I can sort of measure, again, along that sort of center line, right, where the proportion of, where the length proportion of the back of the wheel is, right? It's here. And I can then sort of measure this there, right? And then I can measure what else I want there, and then I can kind of take it out, right? And I can measure it over here. That's the point to understand, right? Like, if I wanted to sort of say, where do the mirrors go, for instance, again, you're using that sort of center line proportion, right? Where is it? I have this thing on like speed dial. This is the best. I forget which TA did this, but this is like money. It makes it so much easier. Yeah, so, I'm kind of thinking like, well, oh yeah, that's where the wheel is, right? That's where the actual kind of cockpit sort of entry thing is. Here are the mirrors, right? Again, you can see the mirror is kind of on that sort of, 1, 2, 3 line, right? It's a little bit behind the steering wheel, right? It's kind of like roughly, kind of halfway between the wheel and this thing, like whatever it is. Again, I don't think, as long as you're pretty close, I don't think that's going to matter. But can you sort of understand that, again, like if I kind of just decide like this on the ground plane is where those mirrors go, right? That's right. We just put that line in, again, just being quick and diagrammatic. I kind of know, oh, that's where the side is, right? That's where the top is. Where's the side here, right? That's where we are here, right? You can easily put those side mirrors in, right? And they're going to be placed sort of symmetrically. Does that make sense, right? Because we're kind of finding the measure here, right? That would be the halfway point sort of between those, right? I know kind of where they're going to start. Again, if I wanted to measure more, right, I could sort of make sure that this distance kind of feels right. But the key thing is like, what will make it feel good is being along the center line, right? It feels like it's not important, but getting that sort of measurement and then quickly just being able to be like, where is the steering wheel, right? It's like, well, yeah, it's kind of like a little bit, behind here, right? Oh, it's sort of up there. Again, where is the right? Where's this backrest? It's kind of like, oh, it's here on the ground plane, right? Where does the exhaust manifold sort of start? It's like, oh, well, it's over here, right? We just draw that up, and then you know where it is, right? Bang, you're sort of there. So it's kind of like, yeah, that center line is almost like your measuring thing to kind of find a point, right? And then you can again find it right on the side, and then again, it becomes quite quick once you understand that. So yeah, but again, it feels like it's a total waste of time the first time you do it, because you're just like, why am I wasting time here? Cool. So I forget who's.
Yeah, I mean, I hope overall like this is helping people. So obviously, like, it's a bit hard just to get to everyone's thing individually and redraw over the whole thing, right? And I mean, the TAs are doing a good job of that. But like Tim and I are just trying to give like those big broad notes as to like how you can kind of fix things up, or like the concepts to use when you're doing this stuff. Yeah, and the more you get into it, the kind of, I think everyone gets a bit thrown by those organic shapes, but just remember, like, all those organic shapes can be kind of measured out as well. right? That's the thing, and that's what
Yeah.
that's what the boat kind of exercise is for, to show you how you can do those round shapes and then connect them up. Remember the boat like even curve. Remember you kind of got your X, Y, Z, right? The boat kind of came forward and wrapped around, and then also curves in under the hull of the boat, you know, and then you had the center line. So like you had to blend some of those forms together. Remember people who had a bit of a hard time getting the back and the center line of it, kind of you had to like blend that shape. But remember the initial thing was you just measured all of those things out. So yeah, it's just all the same stuff. It's just on something more complicated, but don't let it get so complicated in your head, you know, that you kind of like go, too hard, can't be bothered, I'll just like draw a line, right? All the things are pretty easy, right? You just got to like think your way through it, right? And there's always a way to kind of get it to work.
Yeah, totally. It is a matter of understanding, again, when you need to think, when you need to do, when you need to go, right? You know, again, I was sort of saying about this before. Overall, I think the proportions are looking kind of good, but I sort of feel like still kind of when we sort of are drawing, you know, to the grid, right? Like, you know, this looks. This looks a bit sort of too wide here. I'm like, where is that sort of grid, right? This wheel just seems like, again, like it's sort of trying to be like, oh, let's just draw it in and see whether it can sort of go, see whether it will kind of turn out well. So, right, again, just keep watching these things, right? Where is it sitting on the ground? I feel like some of this stuff feels like we're kind of working, again, like it's sort of working it out, and then other times it's kind of like, surely we can just draw this in and fake it, right? But it's like, no, we need to sort of, again, find that center. Yeah, and again, the first time you sort of are fiddling around with this center line, right? I mean, if you look at this and you don't know about perspective, most people are just going to be like, I have no idea what I'm looking at, right? It does take a long time to really get the feeling there for like, you know, what's happening.
Have those notes help today,
this
Gemma,
one's-
like all the other stuff? Yeah. So I think you just need to like, just try and construct it a bit more at the start. You know, get it on the ground, work on the ground, find your center lines, which you're doing in some bits. So you can see you're doing it in some bits, but not all areas, right? So just try and bring that thinking across to all of the areas. And then, yeah, just try and, you got a good base, just keep smudging it around till you get it working, all right? Okay.
Yeah.
Hang on, I got a question, Tim. Hang on.
Sure.
No, the back wheels are wider, so they just look a bit too wide. Yeah. So sorry, Tim. Can you go back to the orthographic? Go back to the orthographic. So
Yeah.
So Gemma, look at the orthographic. You tell me how much wider they are. How much wider are they? They're like a tiny bit wider. Yep. But you've drawn them like they're this much wider. Does that make sense? Yep. So that's what I mean is like, look at the proportions, go back to this stuff. That's why these measurements are good, because they stop you from like, they stop your brain lying to your hand. Does that make sense? Yep. So you've just gone, they're wider. I'm going to make them wider. And you made them wider.
Yeah.
Like you did it. That's what you wanted to do. So you did it. But it's just the fact that they're not that much wider. Does that make sense? Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's still like on the inside, it lines up as well, right? So it's sort of like, okay, like we've got a wheel here. That's where it's going to sort of be there.
Sorry, Gemma was saying,
Right,
what were you saying? Yep, like that, the axle that connects to the wheel. Yep. Yep. Yeah, so just, once again, just look at that orthographic from the top and then try and measure it on the ground. And then, like I was saying to Daniela, like if you measure it on the ground, like, and you do that, it's hard to muck it up. You know what I mean? Yeah. But when you don't do that step, then you sort of go, your brain takes over and it's just like, oh, it's got to be wider, so I'm going to make it wider. And then you kind of look at it and you're like,
bit to the left, a bit to the right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I give up.
Yeah.
Hopefully no one will notice. Looks okay. Yeah, it does. Like overall, again, I'm looking at this and I'm like, yeah, it kind of looks like a Ferrari. Hey, it
Yep.
looks pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, but again, let's look at the 3D you're using, right? You know, it's like where is all this stuff? It's all, you know, it's all kind of lining up, right? Right, these wheels, right, the different sort of sides are all kind of lining up in perspective, right? So you just have to kind of look at, like, you know, these ones are in line, right? They're in line with that sort of perspective, with that sort of grid. Right. Again, I think this car's actually got camber on it, right? So we're
Yeah, it
not
was
gonna get,
turning.
like, the full. Yeah, and it's proper 3D. Well, I think it's like a 3D model, but it's like it's in a game or something. But yeah, it's probably modeled properly so that you would see those things move and stuff. Yeah. But yeah, so that's all. It's just like, you know, double check, like, you know, are those things lining up, right? Is that sort of stuff on the grid? Because it is possible, I think, again, you kind of draw it around, you mess around with it, and you're like, oh, this kind of looks all right. Hey, you know, but it's not. And again, the problem is the more you render that, the worse it'll look, right? Because you try to put the shadow in, right? Often, like, this will look okay until you kind of put the shadow in, and then, like, the shadow will kind of tell you that the wheel is, like, a lot further out and stuff like that. Yeah, so often those, it can be hard to know from a, you know, like, deceptive point of view, what, you know, like what's going to look good and what's not going to look good. Sometimes it feels like, oh, this will be fine, and yeah, then you start rendering it, you're like, cool. So this one, this is Ella's. I think this is looking pretty cool. Obviously, again, we want to, you know, eventually you want to sort of, you know, add some sort of move it beyond the kind of the brush, right? Get sort of curves going there and stuff like that. Again, I do sort of cover how to sort of think about doing that with sort of the different masks and things, but I think this is looking really good. So it's just a matter of sort of putting in the you know, extra kind of form pass. So that's just a matter of, yeah, cool. No, I mean, yeah, like I think there's things you could do, but if you want to move on to the rendering and play with that, then I think, like, again, I'm happy for you to kind of play around with that. Again, we could have like a, you know, like the seat and those kind of things. I think some of these are like a little bit sort of wobbly, but again, I don't know what you would sort of say, Simon. To me, I'm kind of like, at this stage, I think rendering it and seeing what happens can be very beneficial, because again, I feel like some of this is still going to look a bit wobbly, Ellie, because again, some of it is kind of like not 100% right. We don't have some of the details, but I still think you can, like, the wheels look pretty good. Again, I haven't sort of double checked them or anything, but, you know, zooming out, I'm like, this looks pretty cool. And I'm confident, because we've seen people do this, you know, if you start rendering it up, it will look nice and shiny and stuff, right? Like, I think the stuff you've drawn in there is looking pretty good. So if you want to kind of move on to the rendering, again, have that 2 weeks to kind of really render it up, I think that's kind of fine. I think that'll turn out well. But yeah, things that probably could be a little bit better would be put in the seat, right? Because that just helps give it that sort of complexity. Again, here, I feel like this sort of, like a, right? Right, that looks a bit rough. And I just mean that sort of the, right, like the angle here, right? Like, this just doesn't feel like it's kind of working. Why? Because typically, again, you know, when we're sort of having curves, right, within each other, right, you're going to see more on this side than on this side. So that means that sort of, you know, what I'm sort of looking for is kind of, you know, a bit more, at least a bit more evenness there, or so that we can see more in this side than that side. And just understand, again, that this is like a very thin thing, right? So it doesn't have that much dimension. And again, watch this here, right?
Yeah, just measure that stuff out, L. So it feels like whenever you got
Yeah.
to the organic stuff, you get a bit like non-measury. Yep. So the
Yeah.
other bits are looking pretty good.
And
yeah.
I think it's good, but again, issues you'll find is like, again, just look at sort of where that center is, right? You've got center there, but just again, keep in mind that we're gonna, like this bottom thing is gonna sort of curve, right? And so I don't think you're quite gonna have that bit there. And that's really important for rendering, because if you're trying to understand like, okay, light's coming from here, and you're kind of saying, well, you know, on this side of it, it's shadow, on this side of it's light. The question is, what side of it is the side of it? If you don't know where the center is, you don't really know, right, where it's kind of turning. And if you don't know when it's kind of flat, right, and it's like, well, if light's coming down here, right, like this is going to be red, right, and that's going to be red, and then as it kind of transitions up, right, it's going to get sort of darker. But if you don't know exactly where that transition point is, that the rendering becomes quite hard. If you have it all there, it's kind of like just paint by numbers, right? You sort of can't mess it up if you understand how that stuff works. Whereas here, you're going to be fighting that. So I do think that these things are worth sorting out, because they will come back to haunt you. I think you could add the seed in there without sort of too much trouble, and that would add a lot of sort of visual appeal. Yeah, and just imagine, again, keep in mind what you're going to want is like a space here to put highlights, right? And then you're going to want to put sort of value here to sort of make this darker. So understanding again, like how where the highlight is will really sort of help you. Just having a place for that will help a lot. And again, I feel like you've done a pretty good job here, but some of this still feels a bit sort of wobbly, right? Like for instance, again, I just feel like we just need to make sure that the width of these feels right.
I know you guys don't want to do this because they're like painful exhausts. I know they're painful, but like a box, remember? The box around them all. They're all cylinders inside. Guess what? A box.
Yeah.
Right? So just draw the box out for all those things and measure them, and then you're not like, so like, you know, where they're connecting into that little triangle bit is like, I know, for example, Elle, you just made all that up, all right? Because like, yeah, you just, if you constructed that, then it would look better, much better.
Yeah.
You know, it just look like it's sort of at the moment, your pipes look like, they're like your arm where they're going
it's
from
separate
thick to
stuff.
Yeah, from thick to thin and stuff. And then you got different little ellipse lines on them that some are, you know, going around different ways and things like that. So just remember, you can construct the cube around all of them, and that'll help show you like the form of all those ellipses, right? Because they've all got major minor axis and all that stuff. You don't have to work that out for all of them. Just remember, like, but they shouldn't give you trouble. They're giving you trouble because your brain is going, no, too hard, won't do it, right? So then what's going to happen? Like, I won't measure those things. I won't try and construct boxes around them because that's too hard. But what's harder? Is it harder spending like 2 or 3 hours constructing boxes around them, or is it harder drawing them 8 times because they don't look right every time? Okay.
Yeah, or struggling with the rendering, right? Where the rubber meets the road here is when you go to render it and you're like, now I've had a lot of experience rendering, so I can probably like fix things on the fly or hide problems. I can optimize for like, let's make this look good, right? And that's a skill you need to build as well, right? I think this skill that people are implementing is like, oh shit, it's not working. How do I make it look good anyway? That is a key skill, right? Don't like appreciate that is a superpower you need to build as an artist, because everyone can always draw stuff better, right? But often people are just optimizing for like, hey, I can make this look cool, right? But again, it's just a matter of having the humility to understand that if you want to make stuff look really good, right, you need to have a solid understanding of most of the basics, and then you're still going to be doing that where you just say, you know, how can I wing this? But you're going to be doing it at a much higher level, right? Not with this stuff. You can't do it with this stuff, but you still will need to do that. So hold that thought for later on, right? It is an important skill. But yeah, the main thing here, Ella, is just looking at, and again, I'll sort of talk about this because this is the first rendered one, so I do want to sort of focus on that. So apologies to these people where we might not be able to get to. I'm sure TAs can kind of give you a few sort of pointers and stuff. Yeah, the thing here is that you can kind of try and render it, and if you render it, it'll look better. But the thing to think about that I, again, think you'll find will help is, again, just understanding you don't need to, again, like you can draw boxes around everything. But the main point that I'm always looking for is, again, like, where's that center, right? Like, where is that center? I know it sounds like we're just saying the same stupid stuff. Like, it really does. But yeah, what I'm kind of looking for is, like, where's the center? Right, and you can see, like, these are probably, I don't know whether this is just badly drawn from above, but also these things are handmade, so it could actually look like that, who knows. But what I'm kind of looking for is, like, these points, right? I'm looking for, like, where's the point at which it kind of turns, right? It, like, okay, so it connects here, right? Connects here, right? They sort of join up here, right? And they kind of join here, and these ones are kind of floating in space. And I'm kind of looking for those points, right? So I'm sort of looking for, like, okay, that's where it sort of turns here, and that's over here. So that's where it sort of, right, it sort of turns there. But I'm looking for those points, right, that sort of tell me, right, like, okay, that's where it sort of connects here. Because I think one of the things is you're not quite sure what's happening, like where it's connecting down here. And like, again, like what's over here? Again, remember this is it's a V12, so right there is like a big sort of bit of engine here, right? And then this thing again sort of does pop up there, and you get the same thing here on the other side, right? And again, the exhaust manifold is kind of connecting right into the middle there, right? And again, that's so to just look at the structure, it feels like some of that's kind of maybe transparent in there, whereas that won't look good. Other Ella's sort of, or Ella, not Ellie, is asking, would you recommend doing small studies on each part to make it whole? I think that can help, right? But for me, again, I don't do a lot of that sort of thing. I just sort of try and nut it out here. But things that I would do is just diagrammatically try and work it out, right? Like, what is the V12 engine, right? Well, a V12 is, right, it's like a V8. The reason it's called a V is because it's a V, right? So you've got, again, these kind of, you've got your cylinders here. This would be a V sort of 6 because you've got 3 on each side, so there's 6, right? This is kind of like what one of these engines looks like, right? And so you could just sort of look at that, right? I don't need to be like, oh, where are all the details, but just conceptually, like, what is happening, right? Like, what is the structure here, right? Like, look at the engine, try and see if you can find some stuff, and right. And so you've got the engines here, and you've got the right these kind of like throttle bodies, right? Sort of sticking up, right, out of there. And then you kind of have the exhaust, right? It's sort of coming from the middle. Now, I don't need to know, right? Like, it's all just spaghetti, right? But I'm just sort of understanding, like, it's kind of connecting in here, right? And then again, like, what's happening is, right, it basically, like, these things go up and down and up and down. People don't know about engines. Again, I don't know heaps, but I know a bit, right? These things are going up and down, and that kind of turns this kind of crank thing, right, that turns the drive shaft. And so then this thing starts going sort of round, right? And that's how an engine works, right? So it's sort of, things explode here, and it makes these pistons go up and down, right? And then there's a crank that sort of turns that up and down sort of energy into round and round energy, right? And this is how all engines are kind of operating, right? It's sort of going round. And then what happens is you kind of have then another box, another thing over here, right, but behind it, or I mean, it could be in front of it in this case, but basically turns this sort of round and round energy into, it turns it round and round that way, into round and round that way, right? So then you have sort of the wheels on there, right? Does that make sense? So just understanding like, oh, there's going to be like your sort of differential, right? And your sort of gearbox and stuff like that, right? That's kind of what's happening. So that's the sort of thing I would be looking at, is to be like, okay, here's my sort of cylinder banks, right? And I'm looking for, again, like, where do those sit on the ground plane, right? And I'm looking for like, where's the other one over there, right? Where's that other one, right? Where does that sit? How does that sit in there? And then I'm sort of, you know, thinking about, okay, where are these things? So it's that sort of stuff that I feel like is useful. Otherwise, you're kind of just copying and being like, well, this is a pipe here, right? And that's just, it's a disembodied pipe floating in the air, and you kind of don't really know why it's there. So that's the sort of study that I would do, is try and sort of just be like, okay, I've got a bit here and a bit there, right? Like what is the general, you know, what is the general sort of structure here, right? It's kind of, you sort of got, again, the V, right? Sort of big, and it doesn't even, you don't even have to draw the perspective good, right? Just diagrammatically try and understand in your mind, right? Like what's sort of happening, right? Because that'll sort of make it make sense more, right? And just kind of think about that, like what is this? Because when you first look at it, yeah, you know, it's just like a huge mess of nonsense, right? But all this, every single thing here is there for a reason, right? Again, you sort of got the cylinder banks, right? Sort of these things. Again, this is where this is where your sort of gearbox differential is going to be, right? That's where the wheels sort of come out. All this stuff is here. I don't know what any of that stuff is, but again, exhaust gas has got to come out there, right? Because again, we're exploding stuff into the engine. It's kind of ridiculous, all that stuff. It's like everyone's like worried about all these things, and it's like you're driving a car that literally explodes like thousands of times every minute. You're just exploding petrol in your car all the time. It's terrifying. This is all that's happening. So I would do studies of that. And again, you might sort of try and, again, do a study of like the exhaust things and kind of go, okay, what these do is these tell your brain what's going on. So these are for me to be like, okay, like what's happening with these exhaust things, right? Like how is this working? See if you can find some extra sort of reference and go like, okay, then these bits are going here, then they go down, then they go out, right? And then it's like, you know, these two bits join into one bit, right? Like how many bits are there to begin with, right? Does that make sense? And just try and understand it. But it's not, when I'm doing these studies, the goal is not to make a good drawing. The goal is for me to kind of understand it in my brain a little bit better.
Yeah, and I think Tim, if you get some of that like core structure right, like you just get some of that stuff in the right spot, then the spaghetti bits that are in there, because there is a lot of like spaghetti, you know, curving around stuff. Totally. Then those spaghetti bits you can kind of wing a bit, right? And as long as you're getting them to feel like they're running along the right minor axis, like the ellipses, then everything will feel fine. But it's sort of just getting a bit more of that structure. And yeah, I'm totally with you, Tim. Like, I don't think, guys, that you need to do like specific studies of stuff to like just know it inside and out. It's more just like getting it to feel like they're even sides of even widths from the center line, right? That's the important bit, is just if they feel like they're even widths from the center line, they'll feel like it has structure. And you see that with like people's character design, right? The like really good character designers that are really good drawers, like you see, like, you know, they're applying the same principles even to the characters and things, right? Like, I mean, we've got Brian Lee doing those figure drawing classes at the moment. He does the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't he always showing you guys like where the center line is? You know, he's like, just measure those things out from there. It's the same thing.
It's the same
and
thing.
It's just more like organic shapes.
Thing.
So you're blending shapes together when you're doing like figure drawing. But it's the same stuff. And when you look at good artists that do really nice characters that have lots of form and feel like in 3 dimensions, it's just they're just in control of that like structure and those measurements and things. Does that all make sense, everyone? So like this stuff, we're not just doing this stuff so you guys can draw a Ferrari car, right? This is for everything, you know? this is really difficult. We're trying to make you like really, really good, you know? And the stuff that Brian's doing is the same things. Like, it's difficult and we're trying to make you really, really good. Does that make sense? So, but you just got to keep, so like Tim's doing here, right? Like, he's just, even when Tim's doing like fantasy characters, is a lot of times he's trying to find the center line where things are in space, you know? Even when he's drawing like horns and things like that, he's like kind of constructing those so they look like they're finishing at the same point in space. Yep. So it's like, just don't think that this stuff's just going to be like, oh, this is just for boring, for doing the stupid Ferrari.
Yeah.
Because it's not.
How do you
It's
draw?
like
How do you
for
draw
all of the
giant
stuff.
warcraft armor? Right. You gotta construct the. Right. You gotta think about, where's my center line? Right. Like, where's my. Right. Where are my pipes? Right. That's all. You know, your kind of big armor is, right. It's just simple shapes. Right. Where are my ellipses? Right. It's basically just like the pipes. You know, same sort of thing. Yeah. It's all the same. It's really like. Yeah. I don't know. It's like, how do we explain? I just feel like sometimes it's like, I feel like it's like a cheat, because I'm like, we just say the same things all the time. Everyone kind of yeah, you know, and it's Brian saying the same thing, and I'm like, well, why do you need to listen to me? I mean, he's saying the same thing. It's the same concept, but the trick is for you guys to understand it, right? The trick is for you to figure out how this functions for you, right? And that's why I think it's not just a matter of doing these Ferraris and doing these things. That's, we've kind of been saying this from the beginning, is, you know, people will sort of say, oh, how many of these things do I need to do? How many boats do I need to do? And I'm like, do as many as you need to do to understand how the idea works, because later on this will come in handy. And again, I feel like sometimes people hear that and sometimes people don't. And, you know, it's really important to understand that, again, it's not like a school thing where we're saying like, oh, pass, fail, whatever. Like, I genuinely mean that. And that's why often, do you know what I mean, Simon? I'll spend half an hour talking about how the important thing is that you want, like, you understand it, right? It's not a matter of like what you're showing to us. It's that you understand it, because then you can apply it to the Ferrari cockpit, right? It's the same idea. And yeah, there's just so many of these moving parts at one time. You just do need to kind of understand like which things are core and how to remember like the difference. Because again, understanding centerline drawing a Ferrari or a fantasy character is like, it's the same idea, but the things you're thinking about, right, and the implementation of it and you practicing that are very different, right? So, you know, it's not like, you know, it's just, oh, it's easy, it's the same thing. You have to practice them to understand how to apply it. But the concept of measuring, finding stuff on the ground plane, where your horizon line is, et cetera, it's very foundational. It's very fundamental to everything, right? And once you get it, yeah, it's kind of like riding a bike, right? You kind of, it's with you forever. So it's worth putting the effort in. Yeah, it's not something where you can just forget about it. And again, we're doing the plane next year, so you can't escape this, right? At the very least, it'll be years of painful trying to draw stuff in perspective when you don't know how, right? Eventually it will end when you graduate, but until then, it's not ending. So yeah, just try as much as you can, even if you're like, oh man, you know, yeah, I really wasn't, you know, you might have been listening or think you were listening and you tried to apply it and it didn't quite work, and then you're like, oh, maybe it won't matter or whatever. Just understand, again, part of this is us teaching you that it is important, and for you to realize that you need to learn it, right? And I think you can talk to a lot of the TAs. That's what they did. Like, the major thing we were able to communicate to them over the 3 years was that learning these fundamental things is really important. And we kind of showed them how. That doesn't necessarily mean that they all aced it when they graduated, right? But the knowledge that it is important, where their ability is in the continuum of sort of mastery was clear. They knew that they maybe needed more work, maybe didn't, and they knew how to get better. They knew how to do those exercises and how to sort of get that. And I feel like that is the more important lesson, right? It's kind of like, don't worry about whether your Ferrari is the best now. Just worry about, like, are you on the path to mastering these skills? Do you know how to practice them? And, you know, do you realize that that's really important? That's really all that's there. Because sometimes it'll take people years more to get it. Some people already have got it. That doesn't matter. You know, in 10 or 20 years, if you're a professional artist, it won't have mattered whether it took you an extra 6 months or a year. to master to get to the point where you can kind of juggle all these balls at once and get the horizon line and the center line and the measuring and all that kind of stuff happening at once while you're sort of not thinking about it like a crazy person. But again, in the long run, it's not going to matter, right? Once you get it, you sort of get it. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Yep.
Good luck drawing your Ferraris and rendering your Ferraris and all that kind of stuff. We'll see you guys next week, and we'll be doing much the same thing. So yeah, hit TAs up in Discord, or if you need a hand. This probably is crunch time where everyone's going to be like, oh, actually, I do need help now. But most of the stuff I'm seeing is looking pretty good, right? It's just a matter of getting all these basic things happening. And again, for a lot of people deciding whether they want to just jump to rendering and see what happens, or whether they want to sort of correct stuff. Yeah, totally up to you guys.
All right.
Yeah,
Thanks, Tim.
time for no sleep.
Okay.
No worries. We'll
Bye,
see you
guys.
later.